Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for May 6, 2019. We'll begin with new cases. Item number 1, 2018-22A, 255 18th Street, Brooklyn.
This is an application to re-argue the board's determination that granted... Oh, I thought hers. Okay. This is an application to re-argue the board's determination that granted the DOB's application to revoke the C of O for the subject property. A motion to re-argue is available where an application has been denied, dismissed, or approved, so available in this case. Under our rules, appellant must establish that the board misapprehended the relevant facts or misapplied any controlling principles of law. While not stating it specifically in the context of the rule, appellant appears to be stating that the board misunderstood which floor plans DOB relied on when approving the application for final CO issuance. However, the plans that appellant urges were the correct plans were never produced by either DOB or the appellant, so I ask how the board could have considered what may or may not have existed. It was incumbent on appellant to produce those drawings and not unreasonable to expect that the approved drawings upon which the CO supposedly was based to exist somewhere in the files of the owner or its consultants. Architects normally hold on to plans for a long time. Actually, the standard is 7 years that you hold on to plans, even 10 because of liability laws. The owner had plenty of time to produce the drawings if those were the drawings upon which the C of O actually was based. DOB's submission on this appeal also describes the notations in the DOB paperwork that appear to indicate that such drawings were never provided to it. The board has now, and had at the time of the hearings, no way further to go on that question. Hence, the board relied on the set of drawings that showed the proposed use as Use Group 2 dwelling units on the upper floors, and which showed at the rear that the rear wall would be cut back to comply with the multiple dwelling law. In terms of the interpretation of law, BSA discussed at length the applicability of the multiple dwelling law to the subject property. As stated in its preamble, the multiple dwelling law applies to all multiple dwellings in New York State unless specifically exempted from such compliance by the law itself or where the zoning resolution imposes stricter requirements. It stands independent of Article 1, Chapter 5, which is the section that allows for conversion of loft buildings in certain areas. Applying the MDL to this property, as was discussed at length at the hearings and to which appellant responded both in hearing and in writing, requires certain minimum setbacks from the rear property line to allow for legal light and air in each dwelling unit. The approved drawing specifically made reference to multiple dwelling law section 277 and showed a setback for light and air that would have required demolition of a portion of the rear wall and its reconstruction set back into the building. I don't see any misapplication of law or misapprehension of facts in the above. And as to a partial revocation of the CO, as is suggested and as was done in the East 11th case that we decided, that East 11th case was about 2 buildings on one zoning lot, and the subject of the revocation was the rear building, which was non-compliant and non-conforming. The front building, by contrast, was fully compliant and fully occupied, with the exception in terms of compliance really had to do with building code of a first floor egress route that had to be modified. In this case, we have one building where at the very least all of the rear units lack legal light and air, and the cellar and first floors were illegally occupied. The non-compliant sprinkler system also was building wide. In addition, the board's inspections observed that interior work in the apartments that may or may not have been done prior to CO issuance, which increased the degree of noncompliance as to floor area. So actually, the building wide is not in compliance, and so I don't see the East 11th Street revocation order of the rear building to be a comparable condition. In any event, I don't believe a partial revocation of a CO where such revocation doesn't affect discrete floors is workable where fire egress, protection, services, utilities, et cetera, are tied to the entirety of a floor. So those are my comments. Anybody else?
I don't think I need to add anything. I agree with your assessment of the issue. Only thing that I would say that the applicant had stated how we did not give them the opportunity to review the MDL documents. As you mentioned, we asked those questions several times, and I think the fact that it's a very easy one to resolve, if it were, why was it not resolved? And I think the options that were initially listed, I don't think they are very easy to resolve, because it will result in tenants being relocated, them not having a section of the wall, or even if it's an easement, as DOB pointed out,
It has to be a zoning lot.
it has to be a zoning lot, and then you're compromising the other properties, not that, then they become a non-complying or conforming, they
Yeah.
become non-complying if the rear yard is reduced.
No, so
So-
so it's common knowledge that when you're relying on an adjoining property for light and air, that the Department of Buildings will only allow that to be on a zoning lot, right? So you need to do a zoning lot merger and get an easement. So, but the merger of properties doesn't create a new noncompliance, it's only subdivisions that do. But that's assuming that the neighbors,
All four property owners would be willing to, and they're all
Yes.
separate property owners.
Right.
So it's not an easy lift, and I think we were very thorough in our assessment and realized the difficulties in achieving the MDL requirement in an as expeditious manner as the applicant has stated in their letter.
I don't have any additional comments. I agree with the two of you.
I have the same. I agree with the remaining members of the board.
okay.
Decision items on the SOC special order calendar. Item number 2, 77176BZ, 375 Pearl Street, Manhattan.
Okay. This is just decision. No. Sorry, I have a lot of notes. All right. The sign design was revised to somehow limit the background color production of this LED display sign to match the color of the wall on which it is mounted, but they didn't go in, I didn't find anything going into an explanation about it. It's just that we saw the sign photos doing that, the photo montage. The tech memo still indicates a potential output of 6,000 nits, which is something in the range of 20,000 lumens, or nearly 10 times the output of the current sign. As we learned at the last hearing, you need to compensate for the daylight by additional brightness to achieve visible colors on an LED sign. The applicant contends that the board has no authority to look at its own record, nor to the terms and conditions upon which the board determined that the grant of the variance, the initial variance, satisfied the findings. The applicant is incorrect about that. In considering whether a requested modification to a variance falls within the parameters of the original grant or implicates the original findings, the board must look at its record, which includes the resolution, the approved drawings, and the arguments made in the statement of facts, and anything else that might be in the record. That is one of the many reasons that the board maintains the records of the cases in perpetuity. We have 110 year, whatever, we're up to 104 years of case archives. As we all know, often the resolutions are unclear, and review of the record is the only way for both the board and the applicant to uncover the rationale behind the decision and the details of it. The 70s in particular were known to have been a period when the board's resolutions provided essentially no basis for the decisions. They just repeated what I always like to say, their findings were, having made the findings, we find.
Minimalist.
Right, super minimalist, right? So you had to go to the record in order to find out how you could modify even on a letter of substantial compliance. Otherwise, there would be no way. In this case, the statement of facts made clear that the application was for the logo of a known nationwide symbol of Bell Telephone. I'm quoting, it says, "The proposed logo emblem is constructed of 3-foot 6-inch diameter circle. This emblem is, of course, known nationwide as the symbol of the Bell Telephone system." Then the 1976 resolution itself made clear that the sign under consideration was a logo. It states, "Whereas the proposed logo will be over 500 feet above curb level, the approved drawings refer to the telephone company symbol," that actually says the word telephone company symbol, and this 2002 letter of substantial compliance did the same. It says, "This letter will serve as the board's acknowledgement and approval of the change in logo." The 1976 statement of facts also went through each and every finding of 7221, including the B finding, stating that the purpose of the sign is, quote, "merely to identify or mark the building rather than to invite..."
Sorry. It's my daughter, sorry.
"rather than to invite patronage of the building for production of income," unquote. The statement of facts adds that, quote, "the need for an advertising sign might be amenable to proof in economic terms by comparing an economic return for the zoning lot with such a sign and without such a sign. But in the Bell Telephone case, the statement of facts states that here the purpose of the sign is, quote, totally accessory by way of merely identifying the ownership and control of the building. Hence, the need to mount the sign higher so that it is visible and, quote, the building can be adequately identified." So the purpose of the logo was extremely clear, to identify the building that is owned and operated and controlled, say, by a nationally known entity.
Service provider.
Public service provider on top of that, right? In the proposed changeable copy sign, the new proposed sign, as has been said, its purpose is no longer to, quote, merely identify ownership and control of the building, unquote, but to create what I found in some marketing literature on another sign, an extraordinary corporate branding opportunity that would be unmatched by any other building in the city and increase the value of the leases. That this very fact changes the parameters of the original application. And further, applicant is absolutely incorrect in its assertion that the board does not revisit the findings, and in particular, the B finding, in applications to amend a variance where no new waivers are sought. We often see cases involving residential use variances where the unit counts, unit sizes, or configurations or locations are proposed to be changed. In these events, even where no new waiver is sought, we ask that the applicant establish that such change did not affect the income and expenses such that there is an increase in return, which impacts whether the minimum variance necessary that was initially granted would be disturbed. We do that constantly, and the courts have even directed us to do that in the Bella Vista cases with the transfer of development rights, right? In those transfer cases, the board is obliged to look at whether, by selling its development rights years after the board granted a variance, the site's B and E findings are disturbed even where no additional waivers are sought. That the applicant lists a few BSA cases where the B finding was not discussed in the resolution, but provides no backup materials from the record to help ascertain what the board actually discussed at hearing is hardly proof of BSA practice. In any event, as discussed, applicant is incorrect about BSA practice. The applicant is also incorrect in its assertion that no additional waivers or changes in conditions that are, quote, relevant to the waivers granted are being sought here. As discussed at the last hearing, the degree of illumination necessary for the proposed sign to be visible during the day is many times in excess of what was approved in 1976 and by subsequent letter of substantial compliance. The applicant also requests a sign with changeable copy using a technology capable of producing unlimited copy changes, some of which will be on display throughout the day and night at 2-minute intervals according to what they're proposing discussing right now. A fixed sign with a single logo was what the board considered and approved in 1976. As to the C finding, I do not believe the board concluded at any time that the proposed sign will not have an impact on the neighborhood, and this was discussed at length at hearing. The sign is visible from the arterial highway, is clearly seen from the Manhattan and Brooklyn bridges, and will likely be visible to the new apartment buildings that rise to the same height of the sign now under construction adjacent to the Manhattan Bridge. Applicant appears to be taking the position that it has the authority to determine and direct how the board manages both its letter of substantial compliance reviews, its pre-application meetings, and its hearings. The board is under no obligation to repeat itself at every hearing in order for its points to be made. Every word stated, both in hearings and review sessions, go to the final determination and inform the resolution. The board also has the authority to decide in hearing, upon a review of the written record and receipt of additional testimony in hearing, that a proposed amendment is not minor and that new data provided may have implicated other findings not previously discussed. With respect to the board's reference to the Pan Am sign by way of comparison to the Verizon sign, I don't believe the board was aware that the sign was installed just prior to 1961. However, it is worth noting that there are few signs located hundreds of feet above curb level in any buildings in New York City, and the ones I am aware of predate the mid-90s, so there clearly was a different attitude towards such signs in the mid-70s when this variance was granted. To that, I note there were TPPNs, Technical Policy and Procedure Notices from DOB, in the early 1990s allowing, quote, logos or, quote, architectural features and, quote, symbols to not be treated as signs for zoning purposes. The BSA required that these TPPNs be rescinded in 1998 as being inconsistent with the zoning resolution. The 1976 variance and its specific grant is entirely consistent with the view that logos are architectural features or were architectural features back in that day. By contrast, an LED changeable copy display is not, at least as used in the proposed context, an architectural feature. It's not that I have seen sort of decorative lighting elements on buildings that really are part of the design of the building. This is certainly not one of them. And then, I'm sorry, keep going, I have another couple. And I should underscore, I think this, and one of the reasons I'm speaking like this is because of the tone of the submission, right? And I know Commissioner Otley Brown has something to say about that. And I should underscore that this is not an interpretive appeal, this is a variance. The board has the authority to grant or not grant the degree of waiver it determines to be appropriate and it determines to meet the findings. For example, the board regularly reduces the scale of buildings to fit more within neighborhood character in the context of a use or other bulk waiver, even where the zoning may allow for a larger or differently configured building. The board can also impose conditions that are not strictly within the confines of the requested waiver. For example, on gas stations, the board often requires the site be maintained with fencing and landscaping, even where not explicitly required by the zoning resolution. Section 72-22 gives the board this authority. And further, if the board were to deny this application to modify the Verizon logo as proposed, applicant is free to comply with the requirements of the 2002 Letter of Substantial Compliance or to return to the board with a different proposal. So applicant has not been deprived of any rights that may have been earned in 1976 when the original variance was granted. But now I hand over.
I don't have to add anything. I think I stated what I did at the last hearing, and I strongly believe that the findings related to B and C have not been addressed for me to consider if there is a change in how different this particular action is.
I have to say, I was prepared to speak on this issue enthusiastically, but you have said everything that I could possibly think of to say. I am so in lockstep with you on this issue. Absolutely 100% in agreement.
Okay, thank you.
I have no comment.
I'm also in lockstep, although I would like to add that the applicant's own expert stated that what is being proposed should not even be thought of or considered as a sign, and rather a tapestry. I'm paraphrasing the statement, but that in and of itself would go against our own rules, and in section 107, the special order calendar, that says if in the course of further review of the application or during hearing, the board determines that the scope of the application is major. As you stated, they're acknowledging that in their own statement, and therefore, this is not an amendment or appropriate to be considered as such.
And you're saying they acknowledge it because they're saying, don't think of it as signs, think of it as something completely different than a logo.
And if therefore it is a tapestry and not a sign, and it's so different that we shouldn't even consider it as a sign, how can we consider this as not major? How could this be right for an amendment? If, there's a practicality and reality of major, and they're acknowledging that. We have to acknowledge it as well.
Though not for the same reasons.
I think, Commissioner Otley Brown, you had also observed something about they are even proposing to change the location of.
Oh, yes. Also, what's really interesting is they're talking about the original variance, and they're stating that this is not disturbing the original variance. However, they're neglecting to talk about the letter of substantial compliance, which actually reduced the degree of waiver of the sign in terms of height and even surface area. And so what they're proposing is to put back the height of the original variance as well as the surface area, which then becomes an increase in the degree of waiver because the letter of substantial compliance had already reduced it. So you don't get to go back to the biggest thing you ever had just because at one time you had it. Once you accepted the letter of substantial compliance conditions, and that's it, that's what you're reduced to.
Right.
So that alone means you have to revisit your findings.
That's true. Okay.
You
Thank you.
want to clarify about the intent, because in their submission letter, I saw that they are talking about the intent of the original grant versus the intent of the new proposal, and I believe the intent is totally different. If somebody's coming with a single, simple sign, you call it, and somebody else is coming to modify this, to make it multiple messages on an high definition LED sign, or again, simple, but these messages, it's gonna be changing with time. And I believe if I have a business, I can go to this building and just rent a 10 by 10 space and have the right to advertise on that. So the intent of the original one makes it like 99.99, if not 100% accessory sign. But the intent of the new one, it makes it the perfect opposite of the original one. So I believe the intent here, we're not talking about the intent whether you're advertising or you're putting a symbol or a sign for Verizon versus AT&T versus U-Haul. We're talking about that change in the intent from the fact that you're advertising a single message versus multiple messages that could change every day.
Right, and will change. Yeah.
Yep, and they
Because-
mentioned that
Yeah.
it's gonna be changing. yes.
Right, and leases, a lot of people sign these 5-year leases, 10-year leases, but actually, businesses, as we know in the real estate industry, businesses spend all this money, move in, and after 2 years, they realize the space isn't big enough for them, or they don't like the identity of being in that location. They need to consolidate with another location, and so they leave their lease after 2 years, and so that's, in 2 years, there could be another set of signs that have leased opportunity. And, the applicant is arguing that we shouldn't talk about intent, that we can't assume that something negative will happen. But you're bringing up this 10 by 10 space rental, of course, is the sham lease phenomenon that plagued Department of Buildings for a very long time, right? And so we can't anticipate something like that would happen, but certainly a company renting an entire floor is a legitimate company that let's say, in terms of an accessory use, could have an accessory sign, but not located 500 feet in the air or whatever this is, down on the ground, right where they go.
I think, let's say, just to give them the benefit of the doubt, they did said it would be only for principal users and it will be up to 11 principal users. So maybe they won't occupy 10 by 10, but my issue with this whole thing is that the original 76 grant looked at the fact that this was, as you mentioned, was merely identifying the ownership and control of the building. In this case, these are principal occupants. They don't have ownership of the building and they don't have control of the building. These are just businesses that are renting spaces, which is not what the 1977 BSA variance case was all about. So I think the intent is, what we mean by intent is what then the commission board reviewed and how it reviewed that sign, and what it's reviewing is completely different. The parameters are different. And
The labeling versus advertising.
Exactly. We're not
building.
calling it advertising. We're just saying that what we envision that sign to serve and what this sign is going to serve
Are
is
two
completely different.
Very distinct things.
Great. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Continued hearing item number 3, 12693BZ, 1225 East 233rd Street, the Bronx,
This was administratively adjourned.
for failure to make a timely submission.
Yeah.
Item number 4, 6213BZ, 2703 East Tremont Avenue, the Bronx.
They provided a landscaping plan and photos of the installed planting, but it's really not clear to me from the photos whether what was installed matches the plans. We had a fairly long discussion about the planting beds and how to protect the plants from die-out and trampling. Die-out in part due to the cars kind of moving their heads over the planting. The instruction was to install U-pickets around the beds, the planting beds, and wheel bumpers. Neither of these measures were done or even discussed, really. The explanation for why the wheel bumpers will not be provided is that they are too costly. My research shows that a concrete bumper sells for under $30. And they are also made in plastic and rubber, so arguably those would be a little cheaper, but maybe not cheaper. $30 doesn't seem unreasonable for a bumper. They are installed with a lag bolt, for which you need a worker with a drill. So there are 7 locations at which a bumper would be necessary to protect the planting, so I don't understand the response. And then the pickets we discussed as a measure where people are cutting through the planting to get to the business, and those kind of little low fences would prevent that. So that wasn't considered at all, and actually they're sort of decorative. You can get them at kind of 18 inches, 24 inches. That would be enough to prevent most people from wanting to cut across because it becomes a little more of an effort, right? They have to do it twice.
It also prevents dogs from depositing their remaining
Yes, dog
waste
walking,
there, too.
right. Right, so I actually don't understand why that was dismissed. I don't think it's okay that it was dismissed, so.
I just have one comment regarding the signage. The plans do not indicate the dimensions of the signage, what are the dimensions of the signage? On the plan, including on the building and on the site. They need to provide a plan drawing. So there's one sign on a post, and there's signage on the buildings. I think the plan shows the signage on the buildings, but not the one that's on the post. So
But
all
they're
of
not dimensioned on the building,
They're
or they
not-
are.
I haven't
Well, they
looked at
should
the
be.
plan, I don't remember, but it doesn't include all the signage, including the signs on the post.
And
So all of
there's
that.
still just one analysis form that just says
Right.
120 square
100
feet, 3 frontages.
Yes.
That's it.
And it says 50 square foot per facade proposed, but it doesn't include then all
Right.
the other sign posts.
Okay, okay.
Move on?
Yeah.
Item number 5, 163 through 165, 14A, 502, 504, 506 Canal Street, Manhattan.
Okay. The issue with the folder at DOB apparently has not yet been resolved, so the folder was lost. And so, but the owner should testify. So maybe they've made a little bit more progress on getting the folder recreated, but even once you have that, then now you have to start doing what you were planning to do. So I do understand that problem. What I'd like to say is for the next hearing, since we began this compliance hearing in August of 2018, and the next hearing will be close to that, so it'll be almost a year, we should get updated materials, including updated affidavits from all of the tenants, because we may, over that course, experience some flood warnings, which should add that none of the tenants' personal possessions have been damaged as a result of any rains, floods, or weather conditions. Also, we should get updated flood insurance policy as it expires in June of 2019, and we need to get proof of the escrow account holding, just to show that everything is still, that's for the final hearing, which might be the next one.
Proof of
Okay.
escrow, what was it?
Account holding?
Account.
Yeah, you know, it's proof that they're still holding 25,000 for each
Sure,
unit
okay.
in escrow. Okay.
Item number 6, 31673BZ, 31-02, 68th Street, Queens.
We have proof of service of initial application and of service of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board held their meeting on April 10th, but I don't think we've received their recommendation, and we need to reach out. Whose case is this one?
It's
Carl, so
Yeah.
somebody
We're supposed
make
to have
a...
hearing on April 10th.
10th, yeah. So they may have a resolution by now, because I don't know if that was just the committee or the full board, so. The last resolution states that the plans were amended to respond to the community board's request to provide planting along the south property line adjacent to the residential area. The approved plans, however, that were provided to us don't show any planting, and so there's no buffer other than a fence between the windows of the adjacent apartment building that look right into this use, to the gas station, and there really should be landscaping buffer. The dumpster is also out in the open and should be in an enclosure. On the south property line, on the gas station side of the fence, there are what appear to be vent pipes from, I am guessing, the underground storage tanks or a DEC monitoring system. They rise to the level of the second and third floor windows of the apartment building, and directly in front of them. So if they're venting, it means they're venting noxious, toxic fumes. And I don't know whether that should not be permitted, even if it's permitted. They are indicated on the site plan without a label, and so I like to know what they are. And the reason that this comes up is my experience with designing flues for restaurants. You need to have the restaurant flue rise to a height of 8 feet above the roof of the adjacent property. So how could it be that sort of off-gassing is allowed to off-gas right in front of somebody's window? I don't get that. So, and maybe there's a distance that it meets, I don't know. We also, there's HVAC equipment on the roof. Is it surrounded by noise mitigating enclosure? That was a question that was asked in the notice of comments, and I didn't see a response. We also need a lumen spread diagram, and I didn't find a sign elevation drawing, so we need that as well to show how the signage is calculated. And the satellite imagery shows vending machines not shown on the plans and adjacent to the apartment building. These need to be removed. And there's also this area between the back of the kiosk and the structure of the BQE. I'd like to know who owns that. It seems like this user is using it, which I understand, because this just seems to be kind of like a little abandoned area. And so in some photos, you see the dumpster back there, which is kind of a reasonable place to put a dumpster, but in others, you see a car parked there. So, yeah, so I don't know what the situation is. Anybody else?
It does say state property on the plot plan.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
It makes sense that
Yeah.
it's like a buffer between the BQE and the, yeah.
Item number 7, 30312BZ, 1106, 1108 Utica Avenue, the Brooklyn, I was going to say, I'm sorry, Brooklyn. The Brooklyn.
It used to be the Brooklyn, I think.
Brooklyn, right? Something like that?
There are no notice requirements for extensions of time to complete. All of the construction approvals appear to be in place, but no permits have been pulled, so I'd like to understand the situation with the construction financing.
There are just a few questions I had, and one was, per the 2014 approved plan said the subcellar and the sections do not match. The subcellar plans show community room and classrooms, while the elevations and the sections show parking on the subcellar. So they need to correct the labeling on the plan sheet. This is a note to the council that the 2014 resolution states a community facility floor area is 24,380 square feet. It should be 36,970 square feet. And that is what's shown in the approved plan.
Can you read out what the correct number is again?
It should be 36,970 square feet, and that is what's shown in the approved plan.
Okay.
Though the resolution refers to 24,380.
Oh, that's quite a difference.
It's a big difference, so that, you need to check that, because one might be gross and one might be zoning. And the resolution would only be referring to zoning.
Likely.
And
Okay.
the floor plans, often architects don't know the difference between gross and zoning, I'm sorry to
Okay,
report.
I think it
So-
was zoning, but we'll check.
We'll confirm.
Yeah.
And the approved plan sheet A100B shows, again, it shows a total of 36,970 square feet. And that does not include the cellar.
Okay.
So that's why I'm kind of thinking that
Okay.
the 36 is the zoning.
So
So we
what
need to be
It does,
careful.
according to these previously approved plans, it does include the subcellar and the cellar, doesn't
But
it?
if you look at the
Oh, okay,
chart,
then it says NC.
not included, yeah.
We'll just take a look.
Yeah.
What I would suggest, though, is, well, for one, this was approved when we had video recordings, right? 2014. Yes,
It
the beginnings of it.
just began, I believe,
March, I think it was, wasn't it?
March of that
Oh.
year.
Okay, so I'm not sure whether it's possible to listen, but before you make any changes like that, just because we often see approved plans that were, we've had this experience ourselves, where the plans actually didn't reflect what was approved by the board, because nobody thought to go and check every single thing again, right? So I would recommend actually pulling the folder and seeing what was discussed in the folder and so on.
With regards to parking, I had sorry, did you have anything?
No, I just want to, it was mentioned, sometimes for the environmental review, we deal with in gross square footage, not floor area.
Yeah,
So I'm just
Yeah.
throwing it out there as to something to look at.
Sure.
Maybe in issuing the declaration, there could have been a confusion.
With regards to the parking, I had some questions. Was a restrictive deck with 1117 Utica Avenue for accessory parking for the church, was that recorded? And per 2014 resolution, the church is required to obtain an operative lease with 1124-28 Utica Avenue for 40 attended accessory parking spaces for Sunday church. So if that also...
right. But, no construction has started at all on the site, so,
But we want to make sure that
Yeah.
they continue to want to do that, and
Yes.
that those businesses have
Right.
not been
yes.
converted to somebody.
Right.
So that's just my concern.
I'd like to have a bit of a better future timeline besides just an end date, like when they anticipate things to happen. For example, when they anticipate to pull all their permits, when they anticipate that this loan's going to be executed. Just because their delay seemed to be because, it might have been both because DOB, it takes time to file things at DOB, but also because they didn't have their loan secured to pull permits. And I just want
Right.
that to be a bit more clarified, so we have a better idea of how it's going to go moving forward.
Right. So it looks like with one tiny open item, when I looked up on the DOB's website. One tiny open item remained for, that prior to them pulling a permit. So it seems like what they really need is to get that loan commitment, and then,
That's what
Then
that's what
they
it appears
pull
like, but
permit,
when's that
yeah.
loan commitment gonna happen? I'd like to have a little bit of a
Right.
better
I
understanding of
believe
that.
they said they are currently executing the loan, so they mentioned.
right, but that's the thing, so they seem to have had trouble getting a loan, and so what's the actual status right now?
Maybe they could provide an status
Yeah.
update tomorrow.
Because, yeah, their latest submission was mid-April, maybe something happened in a little while since, or maybe they didn't update in their submission what's really going on with financing, so we should have more. Okay.
Item number 8, 11814BZ, 1891 Richmond Road, Staten Island.
Okay, again, there are no notice requirements for extensions of time to complete. The statement of fact states that other agency approvals were received in 2017, but there is no information about the current state of permitting and/or construction or financing. So we need to hear about that.
Sorry, we are still discussing the prior case
no, no.
because we were looking at the.
Yeah, there are two
Oh,
different
I'm sorry.
variances.
Shall we go
There are
back?
two different
Oh.
variances.
All right, so we need to go back to item number 7, 30312BZ, 1106, 1108 Utica Avenue, Brooklyn.
But we're only looking, oh, there's 30312, that's the one.
Yeah, the one that we're looking at right now is 30312, and that one did approve 36,535 square
Ah.
feet of floor area.
Which is still different from what the approved
But-
plan states.
Right,
Which
okay.
is closer.
Right, but there was a previous variance that they included the resolution for, 28905BZ, but that's not, that had a smaller building
Ah, okay, so this
contemplated.
was an amendment, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so now we're just talking about a few hundred square feet
Yeah,
difference.
right.
That's
Okay.
not critical.
Okay.
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 And I think we still should be clear in order.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay, sorry. I thought you were done, I'm sorry, I apologize. Okay, now we move on? All right, now we're back to item number 8, 11814BZ, 1891 Richmond Road, Staten Island.
Okay, again, no notice requirements for extensions of time to complete. The statement of fact states that other agency approvals were received in 2017, but there is no information about the current state of permitting and/or construction or financing. Anybody else? No?
Appeals calendar, item number 9, 2018-23A to 2018-24A. This is 29 and 31 Herbert Street in Staten Island.
Okay. I have to admit, I'm a bit confused by the submission. One of the open issues was the commitment by the owner, who is the owner of the subject lots and Lot 1, which is actually the subject lot, to widen the roadbed in front of Lot 1. According to the cover letter, the owner has agreed to do this, but they provided no written commitment to do so, such as a restrictive declaration, or even a drawing showing what would be done. And we're not saying the builder's pavement plan has to be approved, that just needs to be provided. The commitment was to widen the roadbed prior to CO of the subject lots, which I agree is the correct order of things. Fire department issued an April 3rd letter of objection, to which applicant appears to be responding in its April 17th submission. Fire department states, access to new lots 104 and 105, which are apportioned from existing lot, is hindered by the width of the existing sidewalk and street. The width of the street beginning at the intersection of Seguin Avenue and Herbert Street is 32 feet and narrows to approximately 25 feet, as shown on Plan 35619 NAV 88. An application was filed for plan review and approved to develop the adjoining lots, formerly known as lot numbers 41, 31, and 34. Access to this development will also be hindered for fire department operations in the event of an emergency. So there are other lots that are in the pipeline for development just down the street from this. Provide copies of the approved builder's pavement plan, approved DOB and are approved by DOB and filed under application number so. Show location of proposed fire hydrants on the site plan, provide elevation drawing of the proposed three-story building. Will the two structures be connected at the second and third floor? And provide fire department connection and show hydrant with 100 feet, minimum curb-to-curb distance 32.2 feet, each structure fully sprinklered. So the reference to those adjacent lots, 31, 34, and 41, I just want to verify that the applicant verify that they're not also owned by this developer or someone connected to this developer. The elevation that was provided in response to fire department comments shows that access to the parking at the rear of the site is through an 8-foot high by 20-foot wide passageway that goes under the building. So I want to make sure fire department's okay because there's cars in the back. So I think of things like car fires where the fire department might need access. I don't know. A response to the question of hardship and its distinction from the decisions in Browse and Brock Properties was provided. The argument states that the subject roadway already gives access to tax lots 22, 23, 24 in block 6681. I think there may be a typo as there are no such lots on block 6681. And on block 6680, lot 24 has no frontage on Herbert. So I'm not really sure what we're supposed to be looking at. Those were my comments. Others?
I think they failed to make the appropriate GCL 36 argument waiver, and I say that because they failed to address that in the absence of this waiver, it would be an undue hardship to require a mapping, for them to underdo a mapping. They don't make that argument, and they don't follow Browse that states that an argument such as that can be made if you have such a small development, and then requiring an applicant to make to map the entire street on such a small development would be the undue hardship. They failed to make that, and for some reason or other, and I really can't identify it, they failed to make that argument, so it would be improper for us to assume that is their hardship if they're not willing to say that it's their hardship. And that particular hardship would then extend itself to the adjoining property fronting on a map street, because the board would consider whether the totality of properties owned or that were owned or are owned by the same owner applicant, is that entirety, would that be a development that would be large enough that an argument that it would be unduly hardship, it would be an undue hardship for them to proceed at a mapping actually would fail.
But that's a different applicant, right? We think they're unrelated, those other three lots
Sure.
down the street.
Yeah, I'm saying, if even the adjoining property, if they take the adjoining property that we know is the same applicant, if they were to say, okay, if we take these two properties together, it's still too small of a development to require mapping. It would be an undue hardship to not grant us this waiver. This waiver was created for the very purpose of relieving us of this hardship of mapping. That argument wasn't made. And if they're not willing to make that argument, then their absence of saying that means that it's not a hardship for them.
Well, I think it may be the absence of them saying it because they're not, they haven't really figured out how to make these arguments, and they need to learn, right? So because there's this focus on, this is my beef always about lawyering. You know, when you went to law school, you were taught how to research cases, right? You went and you found the cases that support your principles, and then you learned about the cases that didn't support your principles, and then you made an argument to pursue the ones that support and distinguish the ones that didn't. What I see happening in a lot of cases where the lawyers here are asked to write memoranda of law, they seem to have forgotten those basic beginning principles about how you make a legal argument, and instead they rely on the cases that we raise. And we raise the cases for particular purposes, right? Because the cases stand for a particular proposition. But there are many cases, actually, about this specific subject that aren't Browse and aren't Brock, right? Many that just talk about one little house on the block that needs this waiver because it would be unreasonable to ask them to, go to the city planning board, whatever, and redistrict an entire area. And so it's confusing to me that these kinds of legal arguments sort of go off on a tangent and don't just go find the cases and actually make the legal arguments. So it doesn't mean that they're admitting that there's no hardship, because, right?
If they
It
come
means that the lawyering leaves a little bit to be
If they
desired.
come in tomorrow and state that this is too small and to require, and that's why, and if they said that's a reality for them, that'd be a very different story. I may have a more cynical approach as to why they may not be stating the something, but that's an opinion I'll reserve for now.
Okay.
I believe you're not saying that they didn't address the hardship issue at all. You're not saying that.
They didn't address the hardship pursuant as in line with the case law that is the basis for such a waiver.
Okay. So whatever they presented in their submission
Is not the very
convincing
hardship.
convincing so far to you. That's what you're saying.
That's correct, but it's not they're not addressing the very hardship that the case law requires they address for such a waiver to be granted. And that hardship is that it'd be unduly burdensome for a development of this size to be required to map the street.
Okay. Excuse me. Item number 9, I'm sorry, new cases, item number 10, 162 to 164 15A, 139 48 88th Road, 88-30, 3400 44th Street, Queens. Should I call the other one in conjunction?
It's basically the
Item
same.
number 11, 165, 166, 15A, 88, 36, 38, 144th Street, Queens.
Okay. There are no notice requirements for extensions of time to obtain a CO. However, it appears that the applicant provided a copy of the initial application and notified officials of the hearing. The materials indicate that only a sewer connection permit is required to complete the project. I'd like to just know what's involved in obtaining that approval. And there appears to be a partial stop work order on the first application named. So they should explain that. It's dated 2011, so that doesn't make sense in the context of a project that's 85% complete or whatever number. So I'm thinking it's a remnant on DOB's website that needs to be removed, because I also see current building permits issued subsequent to the stop work, so.
Yeah, and I think, did you also refer to the outstanding ECB violation regarding the fence?
Yeah.
So there's also an outstanding ECB violation, so if they can just provide some updates on that.
Item number 12, 2018, 125A, 495 Wild Avenue, Staten Island.
We have proof of service of initial application to officials, but I actually don't find the notice of hearing. So I really looked everywhere. I looked in the emails, I looked everywhere, so please let me know. What we do have is many submissions of the proof of service, like 4 times in all different places, and the most recent one was most recently submitted one was a proof of service, wasn't hearing. Even though the cover letter is dated now, if you look at the letters themselves, they're dated at the time of submission.
Maybe I thought it would have been a proof
Yeah.
of service of the hearing.
So anyway, the community board recommends approval. I'd like them to indicate in their materials on the drawings how far the subject site is from the nearest map street. I'm hoping Victory Boulevard is actually a map street, because it certainly looks like one. And we don't have fire department comments on this. I would like them to comment on access to the rear parking, again, through a 28-foot wide by unknown height underpass, and also whether or not the building should be sprinklered. The applicant, just to provide us with that information, needs to provide an elevation of the building so that the fire department can know the height of the underpass. The DEP provided a letter of no objection in July of 2018. DEC issued a letter in December stating it has no jurisdiction, it's not a wetland area or anything like that. There was a memorandum of law provided attempting to argue that the hardship finding required under GCL 36 has been met here. The memo is rather unfocused and wandering. To be clear for the record, the board is not required to follow precedent if it finds circumstances have changed that obliges it to consider different approaches. A better argument for hardship in this case is the subject lot is the only unimproved lot on Wild Avenue between Victory Boulevard and the service road of West Shore Expressway, with access to major commercial uses located all along the same side of Wild Avenue, and it's a very small lot, so it's not like a huge development, it's a small lot, right? I note that the proposal here is to continue the sidewalk at the same width as there is on either side of the subject lot, which is what I'm always looking for, continuity of sidewalk. But I would like fire department to note and comment on the fact that parking along Wild, nearest the Victory Boulevard exit or access, is head-in parking rather than parallel, and appears even to be on the sidewalk on both sides of the street. So that obviously is reducing the width of the roadway, and I don't understand how all of a sudden everyone here decides to park head-in. It's, everywhere else is parallel, and all of a sudden here it's head-in. So, anybody else?
I just want one clarification, and that is with regards to the zoning chart and the statement of facts refers to a two-story building, whereas the plan that has been submitted shows it as a one-story building. So I would like a clarification on that.
Yeah, so that's part of it is that elevation. And the only way, and it says the only way to get to parking is to go underneath the building on the plan. So it's got to be a two-story building.
It has to be.
Yeah. No, it's all right.
My only question is whether there's a common ownership with adjoining lots on this. And I second the statements you made about the memo and other statements.
I'm sorry, say
I
it.
second the other statements you made, Chair. I just asked about common ownership of adjoining lots, whether or not they're in common ownership, or were they in common ownership?
That's in the context of the scale of the hardship, is that what you're asking about?
It can play into separate things. One in the scale of the hardship, and looking in, it seemed like there were lots next to it were named. They were owned but named by one different integer. I can't remember exactly if it was Wild Avenue 1 or 2. But so I just want to understand if there's common ownership, and from there, it depends on which lots. If they're common ownership all the way to the next map street, that would be, that could create a different question.
No, but in this case, so I get the confusion about ownership. Seems like it might be an existing use that's expanding onto this lot, only because it's such a manufacturing or, a commercial-looking area where you see these sort of low buildings, and then there's lots of parking and all of that stuff, and it's useful to know just what's going on and so on. But in terms of the hardship question, all of the other lots are developed, so then why would common ownership all of a sudden mean that they should go for a mapping action? Those lots have existing businesses on them. So however they got in the door with respect to frontage, they got in the door, right?
I agree to that.
Yeah.
I certainly agree. I just like a better landscape and understanding of the common ownership.
Okay.
Okay. Zoning calendar, item number 13, 2016, 4240, 1231 3rd Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay. The previous hearing was administratively adjourned due to an incomplete submission. Building residents, though, were notified of the March 26th hearing, but did not attend or submit comments. The March 7th, 2017 report from the acoustical consultant making several recommendations to mitigate noise and vibration that were affecting the upstairs apartments was provided and wasn't provided for the prior hearing, which is why we adjourned it. And that report from 2017 stated that these measures were implemented. At the February 12th hearing, I asked that the applicant provide a signed and sealed letter from the acoustical consultants stating that their recommendations were implemented, but nothing was submitted to this effect. So it's nice that you have this acoustical advice, but, you know, that can go in the circular file, and that's very nice, pay the money for it, and then we're just not doing it.
They stated that the acoustical engineer will speak to this, so I just figured they were bringing them tomorrow to the hearing.
Okay. Yeah, nothing like signing and sealing. That's your license on the line when you sign and seal stuff.
When they stated they will come, led me to believe they haven't done it.
Yes. Okay. All right.
They,
Move on?
they need
No.
to
Oh,
show
not
the
yet.
site location on the FEMA map as well.
Ah,
There is an arrow, there is an arrow on the FEMA map. It's a big yellow arrow.
It points to the
but
entire neighborhood?
It points to a point, but it says nothing.
Oh,
So it's just an arrow. So either say site location or
Circle it.
provide a legend and say this arrow means site location. That's how we communicate.
okay.
Now we move on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Item number 14, 2017-288BZ, 17-10 Whitestones Expressway, Queens.
They requested an adjournment. They're continuing to work with the community. This is the third adjournment, so I want to
row.
give them, in a row. So I want to give them a lot of time, whatever it is they think is the right amount, to be sure that that's it, because we're not going to give more adjournments.
I don't think, in this case, the request for adjournment is highly unusual than what we typically get, because here they're trying to work with the neighbors.
Right.
In addressing neighbors' concerns, so it has been an iterative process.
Yes.
So,
Right,
that's something I would request the board to consider, in terms of giving them some flexibility in this.
Yeah, so, but that's the point is, we gave them a hearing in February, a hearing in March, and a hearing in April, well, effectively April, because it's the beginning of May, right? So maybe those 1 month intervals are too tight. So if we give them 3 months or something, that might be enough time for them to wrap this up, right?
Item? Item number 15, 2017-301BZ, 467 Marcy Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. A submission was made, but I don't think it was responsive to the major issues that were raised at the hearing, namely the legality of a temporary structure for a permanent use, fire department's concerns about whether this is a combustible structure, because they were supposed to give specs on this, the location of flammable storage tanks and taps off of the fire hydrant nearby. I don't know if fire department submitted a letter, I didn't find one.
We submitted one this morning, I think.
Oh, this morning? Oh, no, I didn't know.
They have no objections.
Oh, they have no objection.
I thought I
Okay.
forwarded, I'm sorry.
All right, so I'll have to look at that, so, but plans and photos were provided, but I don't know what's different or why they were submitted, other than they submitted photos.
I'll just see.
So now I'm not really, because there was no cover letter explaining this. It doesn't say, we talked to fire department, we worked things out, we have DOB approval to use a temporary structure permanently because the alt one is for a temporary structure, et cetera. So it doesn't answer all of the questions. I really wish the applicant would have been a little more informative.
Yeah, the fire department letter just says a site inspection was performed by the fire department's Bureau of Operations and Fire Prevention Unit and has no objection to this application. That's what it says. Move on? Anybody else?
Just a second.
Okay.
Okay.
I suppose, moving on, yeah.
Yeah, moving on.
Move on. Item number 16, 2017, 313BZ, 853 Kent Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, the requested floor area ratio was brought down from 2.4 to 2, from 7,200 zoning square feet to 6,000 zoning square feet in a four-story, two-family building. The bulk is the same from the front, anyway. The proposal complies with R6B zoning, except it rises without setback to 44 feet instead of 40 feet. The maximum height in an R6B is 50 feet, so there's just no setback for those 4 feet. If that matters to people, for me, I don't really have a problem with it. Lowering the height to 40 would reduce the floor-to-floor heights from 10.6 to 9.6. It would not be unreasonable to lower the floor-to-floor heights to 10 feet, which is actually standard. And the reason I'm looking at that is the section shows the structure of each floor at 18 inches. I don't think these kinds of little buildings are built with an 18-inch floor. They're built with usually concrete block and metal decking, and so if anything, it's like a 6-inch or an 8-inch slab, right? So I don't think those are accurate sections. So just to say that the height could be reduced without anyone noticing it in terms of insides by 2 feet, which gets it closer to where the R6B is. I'm kind of indifferent. I'm just saying what we're doing is we're saying we're using an R6B as our standard, and then we're letting them waive that standard. So that's kind of not consistent with how the board operates when it gives these grants, right? It says, use the R6B, follow it, then that's what we're giving you because that's what everybody else in the neighborhood has. So that's why I bring that up. I believe the front balconies were removed, but there's no side elevation to verify. We need side elevations. The building sets back from the rear to create roof terraces at the second and fourth floors. That's how they're reducing the floor area. I think we have sign off on hazmat and air quality. Our council should include the December 14th, 2018 DEP RAP and CHASP conditions in the resolution. I don't think we have noise sign off, as the December 4th comments indicated that the data was too old.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, I think nobody noticed that the noise wasn't a sign off.
I'll follow up.
Yeah, okay. That's it. Anybody else? Yes.
So they sent in a new financial statement, and the new financials dealt with the E finding, because to me, the B finding had been met, because the industrial scenario, the return was much lower than the minimum indicated from the realty rates. So I had a number of questions aimed at the E finding, and although they weren't all addressed or addressed in the way I would have liked to see them addressed, they did get the message and they did bring down the size of the building. So that was good. I had asked for information on the comparables in terms of the number of bedrooms and the comparables to ensure whether or not they were actually comparable and that the adjustments were appropriate. I didn't receive that. I talked about the FF&E, and I wanted that taken out of the development costs, and they did remove that. However, the construction cost for the residential per square foot actually went up. So I don't know whether they funneled the FF&E costs into the general construction costs, or whether it was just that it was a new construction cost estimator and his costs were just different. I'm not sure. However, the size of the building went down, so the overall development costs did go down. And so the spirit of what we asked for was actually granted to us. So I got to let it go.
Okay. That's a new standard.
The spirit.
Okay.
Good. Item number 17, 2018 116BZ, is 1982 Utica Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. A revised plan was provided that shows the clothes bins to be removed and the car washing station to be relocated away from the residential home and adjacent to Utica Avenue and the auto dealership. I actually listened to the hearing video again, and we had agreed to collect the dumpster, vacuum, and car wash together at this location. I actually couldn't remember if we had agreed to keep the car wash. And include drainage for the car wash. The revised drawing shows the dumpster enclosure being reduced in size to 6 by 6. I don't think that's enough room for a dumpster. My research shows that all dumpsters, no matter what the cubic yard is, are all 6 feet wide. So you couldn't close the door. And then the car that is parked at the washing station is shown with the doors closed. When you open the doors, which people will do, because that's what you do when you wash your car, right? And you stand there with the wand that Carlo described as being really difficult to control when you're washing the car, you're going to get hit by the car that's coming up that curb cut. So we did talk about that not being enough room. We asked for a maneuverability drawing to show actual car widths passing through this, and they do, but they don't really show it in operation. So I think, for one, people won't park that tightly to the edge because they're going to want to be able to pull the wand out and get it into a position where they can wash the driver's side of the car, so they're going to be pulling further away. So I don't think it's a realistic maneuverability diagram. The lumen spread diagram shows light levels well above 0 close to the property line and not dropping to 0 until you're well within the residential line, so that needs to be redone. It needs to be 0 at the property line. The landscaping plan shows a planter along the south perimeter, which is shared with the auto dealership. I know we discussed this at the last hearing, but it seems that the real need for landscaping should be a continuation of the planting bed along the west property line that's shared with the residential use, not to protect the auto dealership, which doesn't need protecting, right? The maneuverability diagram shows there's plenty of room for the planting bed there, and it would be a continuation of the existing one. There is also still shown on the plan, but not labeled, a concrete block something that is probably the mounting base for a vacuum that's located adjacent to the residence that needs to be removed, and it needs to be removed now. I think we didn't want it just on the plans, we wanted it removed, right? That's another reason to put the planting bed there. You won't be able to mysteriously put back the vacuum or the washing machine. There was willingness to restrict the hours of the car wash, because we were concerned about that, but we observed that this owner has ignored conditions imposed in the past. So in our conversations, we said the architecture has to impose the conditions instead. So I think there needs to be a different solution for the car wash. It might, I don't know if that works with changing how the curb cut is used. I don't know what it would be, but if they really want a car wash, it needs to be somehow or other handled differently, I think. That's my view. Anybody?
There are a couple of things on the drawings that needs correction. You pointed out one of them, the base of. There is also an existing vacuum cleaning power vacuum machine that is located along the rear property line. And as you said, I think my understanding was that everything was going to be moved from the rear property line and consolidated to one.
Yeah.
And those should be done.
Based on what you mentioned, I contacted them on Friday and they submitted pictures and plans reflecting they removed it.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Oh, we didn't see,
The
okay.
removal of the vacuum?
The vacuum,
Okay,
the
great.
base.
Of the vacuum and the base?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And-
And to the place where we recommended.
Okay.
Perhaps we could just recirculate those
Yeah.
submissions.
Get back,
I
yeah.
didn't see that. Thank you. And it seems that drainage that is indicated that it's an existing one. So,
Yeah, but I
there
thought,
at four corners, there are 4 drainages. And
but a car wash produces a huge amount of water, so if that's just drainage for a usual rainstorm, that's not the same thing. And plus you're dealing with soapy water. I mean, aren't there issues that you're supposed to filter?
Yeah, I don't know.
I
I don't
don't
know what
know.
the requirements
Yeah.
are.
But just to distinguish this from a full-blown car wash, this
Yeah, yeah.
this is a lot less.
Right. But still, the water's soapy, there is a lot of water compared, I don't know, there must be some rule about how you use these things? I don't know what it is.
I think the dumpster can be located, I don't know, can the dumpster be located on the other side of the building? And that allows for a little bit more of the area for the car wash?
But then that'll be
That's next to the residence.
residential.
No, it's still abutting the auto
Right, but the
dealer.
residential is right
Right
here.
there. Then you're within 20 feet of the
Oh.
residence, or even less.
Oh, yeah,
That's the reason we wanted it moved to that other side.
okay.
And the conversation we had at the last hearing was exactly this one, right? How can you have the dumpster and the washing machine and the curb cut that accesses the pumps all in the same spot?
Yeah, and this curb cut around the building, I'm not sure if it needs to be wrapped around the building that way.
Well, that would pull it back a little further, but that doesn't handle the left-right dimension, the curbing, yeah, around. I don't know if it might be a door into the building from there, no?
I don't.
Like
I don't
usually,
think-
often the toilets are accessed like that?
Yeah,
Bless you.
there is, bless you, yeah.
There's a door?
There is a door.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No.
The diesel
Anybody else?
sign is still on the fence.
Oh,
Diesel here.
And that needs to be removed.
Yes.
Thank you.
all right.
Chair, I
Yeah.
don't know if you want to mention about the community board at the time and
Oh, right. Sorry, yeah. So we reached out, or actually Darrell reached out to the community board. We had asked that the community board clarify for us why they had recommended not having 24 hours, 24/7. Not so much the beer anymore, because I think we discussed that fully, and it seemed like beer is what you have at a convenience store, and that's kind of a very old concept, unless there was some really strange thing that was going on at the site. So in Darrell's conversation with the district manager, or whoever that was, they weren't able to explain the rationale. They just said that's just what they wanted. So without an explanation, and because it's been working for 24/7 for a while, it's not like we heard reports from the community board that it's been a terrible nuisance and so on. So
Did they give any indication that it's been a nuisance?
that,
they was really unsure of why they gave that stipulation, but she
Then
gave
It's not sufficient.
a most likely because of the proximity to the residents. And that
Right.
was probably the reason on why they gave stipulation at the time. But
So
that was
they
it.
didn't substantiate any reason why they requested it?
She didn't
She-
remember.
I think we need to be careful. There are
The
retail
staff.
grocery stores that are, we have commercial overlays on residential sites where you can have a retail store that sells beer,
It's-
so.
Yeah, and I just
It's not
want
an
to,
access, it's not a destination point, it's not a destination point shop.
No, this is not.
So I'm not sure how, if there's a gas station there, I'm not sure how much more traffic having a convenience store
For
be
this.
part of it would be.
Exactly.
Tiny
It's a
store.
very tiny.
Right, No,
store.
I'm
Yeah.
furthering that point.
yeah, yeah.
and I just want to, I think just to piggyback a little bit on Vice Chair said, this is a special permit in a C2 district, unlike some of the gas
Right.
stations that are strictly within a residential district.
Right.
Yeah, I think we had that conversation also, that they could just put in the hearing. We said they could just not have a gas station and put up a 7-Eleven or whatever it is that's allowed to sell beer, right? So, a liquor store, actually, we mentioned they could put up a liquor store. That would be more extreme. Right, and they're allowed to be open till whenever they're allowed to be open, I don't know. Maybe even one of those pass-through windows for emergencies.
Like long hearings on Tuesday.
With a
I used to
drive-through,
spend a lot of time in the East Village, they had those.
with a drive-through, right?
Not for liquor.
As a right.
No, it was for liquor at the time.
We'll talk
It was
about-
adjacent to the other stuff. Those were in the convenience stores.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Darrell.
Item number 18, 2016-1208 BZ, 300 East 64th Street, Manhattan.
Okay. Sorry. Oh, we did?
Email.
Okay, let me just, okay, start. This application was actually scheduled for a continued hearing on June 11th, but we've had so many complaints from the neighbors based on their daily log sheets that we decided to bring this back immediately. Noise logs have been submitted to us by tenants that run from our last hearing through April 29th, with noise the most acute in the early mornings and mid-evenings. Of course, this coincides with the tenants being at home, so we don't know whether there's more. Was there a subsequent email, or are you talking about that one, the 29th? Okay, so I want to say for the applicant's representative to hear, as far as we're able to tell, this use is actually a nuisance, and unless we see an immediate change in conditions, we may have no choice but to direct fire department and DOB to inspect, which we'll just do anyway. But with the specific request to shut it down, to the extent that they have the authority to do so, I want to look into the padlock department, since we won't be issuing any PCE permits for the use. And it's been illegal since 2016, and I was observing the application submission process, which seems like they intentionally delayed. So they submitted in January of 2016, which is approximately, opened a few months later, right? A notice of comments was issued in July, which admittedly is slow. A dismissal warning letter, though, was issued in September of 2017, so they didn't respond to the July NOC. They responded to the dismissal warning in late September of 2017, and then another set of comments was issued in November, to which they didn't respond for 5 months. And then our first hearing was in December. Right, so the way I look at this is trying to avoid dealing with these things and being a nuisance for all of those years operating illegally. And we saw actually in one of the emails from one of the upstairs neighbors that she's basically offered to sell them her apartment because she cannot sell it to anyone else. She said, how can I offer it up for sale and not tell people that they won't sleep at night? Right, so instead, buy it from me if you want to operate your annoying use. That's not okay. That's not what our special permits are for. So my inclination is, and it's not the first time we've shut one down, so they should understand that we do this. And they need to take it seriously immediately. Okay. All right.
New case is item number 1, 2018-136 BZ, 25177 Jericho Turnpike, Queens. Do you want to call these separately, I guess, because it's separate actions?
Separate.
Okay,
Yes,
so
they
this
have to
one.
be separate
Okay,
issues.
so this one is a special permit to permit a reduction in the required parking spaces for an ambulatory diagnostic or treatment facility within a PRC parking requirement category B1, contrary to 3621.
Okay. I do want to preface that though these are separate applications that we're going to be reading, their affects each one. Like without one, you don't get the other, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very difficult to be reviewing these independently, but the questions are very distinct. So we have a proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board notably recommends denial of the request to reduce the number of parking spaces, with 2 in favor of,
I think.
I guess I won't read the rest because we're going to open up for the next one, right? So it's a denial for all three actions with different votes, okay? Councilmember Grodenchik also sent a letter of opposition citing traffic and parking concerns that he believes will be exacerbated by the proposed parking reduction. We have 2 letters in support and 6 letters in opposition citing concerns about traffic and parking. I note there is a March 23rd partial stop work on this project for plumbing issues, which is not really our concern, but nonetheless. The building is essentially completed. I'd like to know what the Plan B was if the parking waiver and school use were not approved. Is it appropriate to be reviewing this application with a school if it is not a permitted use in the zoning district? I don't think so. The most recent Schedule A I found includes 17,981 gross square feet of use group 11 light manufacturing use instead of a PCE. Also, the PCE is not an as-of-right use, so that shouldn't really be considered as part of the application. We should be looking at the as-of-right, what was shown on the Schedule A. The no-build considers, actually, the EAS was very carefully done. So the EAS actually looks at all the different kind of mixes of uses, and so the no-build condition considers that the mix of the building is the use group 11, manufacturing instead of the PCE, and then it's some kind of a nonprofit without sleeping accommodations in the no-build. That way, it still keeps the parking requirements quite low, but nonetheless, it's looking at those uses. The build condition, though, includes the daycare and the PCE, which is right, because it's supposed to be the EAS for the entire proposal.
Just so I
Yeah.
understand, I think based on the statement of facts, it said they would require, an as-of-right development would consist of a as-of-right medical facility without any parking waiver, philanthropic institution, local retail, and light industrial use. So they would, under the proposed, the PCE would replace the light industrial use, and the philanthropic institution will be replaced by the daycare facility. In terms of the square footage by square footage.
Yes.
So, and the as-of-right development would require 119 accessory parking spaces.
Right, but so the problem is, I'm not sure that the EAS and the proposed that we're looking at are the same. So the EAS is super careful. It's looking at it how it was filed at DOB. Light industrial use group 11 and a not-for-profit. It doesn't include the ambulatory care. So the EAS no build should be the same as the as-of-right, otherwise.
But there are
Seems to
not
me.
ambulatory care facility as long as they're not seeking a parking reduction.
Yeah.
No, they are, but then the EAS isn't looking at the same thing, right? So the uses are different, the math is different, right? The math on the parking is different. The math on the modal splits and utilization rates are different. So then we're not getting the same apples to apples comparison for the parking waiver, right?
No, because I'm looking at the EAS travel demand, and it assumed a local retail, medical office, light industrial, and a community center. That was a no action. And with action is local retail, medical office, daycare, and a health club.
What were you gonna say?
If the EAS doesn't have the medical office as no build, it's more conservative because the increment would be bigger
Right.
for these, like for
Yes.
church generation, et cetera.
Okay.
So it's like the EAS is more conservative than what.
Right, it assumed an as-of-right medical, so the parking.
No, what? No, the EA,
Yeah.
all right,
it assumed
I don't
that-
want to belabor this too much, we'll look into it, and the applicant can address this, okay? But I am concerned about, what I'm having a lot of trouble with here is the PCE and the daycare are not as of right. So how is it that we're looking at that as a demand analysis for the current application.
If I may.
Yeah.
Okay, so the PCE itself falls below the threshold of an environmental review by itself. So this is a type 2 action. So we wouldn't be analyzing the.
But this
special-
isn't a PCE, we're not looking at a PCE now, we're looking at the parking reduction application.
Sorry, okay.
Right, so that's why I'm having so much trouble. The parking reduction action needs to be looking at an as-of-right building, because that's what we have. We didn't approve a PCE and might not, and we didn't approve a daycare center and might not. So this application needs to, the one that's before us, needs to be the as-of-right building requesting a parking reduction for the use group 6 and ambulatory care uses that are in the building,
Would
right?
as of right need a parking reduction?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's the point is, there is an as-of-right plan that I think we need to get a copy of. That was one of my comments, that we need a set of the DOB-approved drawings. The building is done, right? So there was a Plan B.
Right.
Otherwise, the buildings department would not have approved the drawings, the project, right? So we need to see what that is. That needs to be what we're looking at. Otherwise, we're assuming a grant. How can we assume a grant? You know, arguably, often with these things, it's the daycare centers that take a really long time, the schools take a long time to review, right? They have way more environmental issues and school safety and all of that stuff. So presumably, potentially, this parking waiver, if they could make the findings, could be granted on the assumption that the school's going to be granted. Maybe the school won't be granted. So we can't work that way, right? And they're all intertwined like that. Each one is depending on the other one. And you know, part of the other problem is if you look at the layout of the project, with mixing these uses the way they are, it's affecting the viability of the school, right? So each thing is affecting the other thing. So I think they need to go back and turn this into what DOB approved, and then say, we're going to change this use to more ambulatory care, like we want to take the use group 11 out, or whatever it is, whatever the mix is, because actually I've forgotten how much of each use there is in
So
here.
are you saying the proposed plans that are in here have the daycare, but
they shouldn't.
They shouldn't. They should not have the daycare.
Right, they shouldn't, or the PCE. It should
So
be
that's what
allowable
the issue is, because
uses.
the as-of-right has as-of-right uses on it.
Right, exactly. So the proposed amount of ambulatory care is 18,688, and whatever those other allowable uses are, has to be that, and then the math done on demand for those uses. Because what if we don't approve, you know, the PCE is less of a discussion, but the daycare is a big discussion.
Right, but I understand your thoughts procedurally, but when you look at the practical effects of the whole parking layout here, to me, it's important to see what the proposed use is, because that impacts the operation of this parking garage. So I would want to know about the actual use of the daycare, because to me, that's impacting the garage and the ambulatory care use, because just the fact that you're having those spaces on the side that are self-park spaces, and
Yes.
you're going to have young people crossing
Right.
back and forth with their parents across the entryway, that impacts this garage operation. So if it's replaced with something else, I don't know if it's going to get the same examination and care.
So, no, okay, so this is the problem with this whole application of all of these waivers simultaneously, right? So the first part of it is that you can't assume the waivers for parking. I mean, you can't assume the parking analysis with assuming grants on the ambulatory care, assuming grants on the daycare and the PCE. You can't, because they're not as of right. So that's one group. But when we look at the daycare, and I know we're sort of crossing this, and maybe what we should be doing is just reading in the other application numbers so we have reference, even though we're going to handle them separately. I don't know. When we're talking about the...
Not yet,
No,
not yet,
okay.
just keep talking.
when we're talking about the daycare, I absolutely agree, then we have to look at the types of uses that the daycare is going to be sharing, because arguably there's a reduction in parking, so it's not as many cars going down there, whether or not that matters at all, but it certainly matters that the use that's coming in the same front door is medical facility, the use is a PCE. Those are busy, busy, busy uses, way different than use group 11 light manufacturing, where, what do they have, 20 workers and they never leave, and that's that, right? So I agree. So when we get to the daycare question, I think we do need to look at an assumption of the uses.
Why couldn't it be one application? Why couldn't all of this be one application that is seeking 3 different special permits?
That's a...
And then we
yeah.
can look at it all as the integrated unit it's going to be, because each one impacts the other. Because even though, you know, we're just looking at ambulatory care here, when you just look at the way in which this garage is going to operate for ambulatory care, like, you don't even have any reservoir spaces here.
Right,
So
right.
that impacts this use, but it's also going to impact the daycare use, because you're going to have chaos here,
Yeah.
possible chaos. So to me, I think this should be one large case that is seeking 3 different special permits, in the way we have sometimes schools that are seeking a special permit and a variance, and we're
Yeah.
keeping it together, because it is one building that is going to be, you know,
Maybe,
used in multiple ways.
This is fair, Carlo?
How
Yeah,
can we? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Commissioner. Yeah, I mean, procedurally, this was a little tricky.
Yeah,
I
see.
think the reason procedurally this was separated out was because of the way the declarations could read out if all were approved, and not making them all contingent on themselves, because these are different users. So, again, I'd have to think about it again and go back, you know, we had these discussions earlier on, so I don't have anything in front of me, but I know it was kind of complicated, because how would the conditions cross-reference each other? You have different users, you know, asking for different, you know, so the ambulatory diagnostic, the PC is a completely different user.
Yeah, PCE is actually a separate applicant.
Yeah, these are different operators, different requirements for each action being sought, and then just at the end, if the board were to approve all or any of these, the declarations kind of can't be tied completely together.
Yeah.
So, yes, I mean, I appreciate if there's some confusion. It was also very hard earlier on, and the coordination among different agencies also was a little tricky, so I don't know that, you know, I'm sure there's things we can try to address and work on. Jella?
The agencies are reviewing them like concurrently, but it's like the same EAS. So myself and the other project manager, Veronica, sent simultaneous requests for review, with the understanding that DEP knew that this was 2 actions in one building, but with 2 different seeker. Well, they didn't review
They didn't review PCE.
Yeah.
PC, oh, right, PCE, okay.
But with understanding that there were 2 actions, but in the same building, and that you know, so they reviewed it concurrently each time and issued the same letter actually, but
Yes.
twice.
Yeah.
Basically for different seeker number.
Yeah.
Right, but the difference is they can assume a grant, and for us, it's harder to do that, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I agree with Commissioner Otley Brown, I think that the daycare program is fraught with problems. And so my initial, though we haven't talked about it, my initial reaction is, this is a terrible idea. But because they're trying to do 50 things in this
Yeah.
one building, right?
And-
You have to pick something for the building.
I'd second that. It seems like they have to pick what they want, what's most important to them to move forward first, whether it be the school or the PCE, and move from there. I do second, although we're not up to the school, I do second both the chairs and Commissioner Brown's concerns with some of the issues with the school, but they should pick one, because packaging it all together as if it's all already going to be this one set thing is not something we're required to see like that.
Right.
So I think one way to look at this is to look at the worst case for every level of analysis.
Yeah, I
Like, so
think
you
so.
look at the worst case for the traffic, worst
Yeah,
case for the
yeah.
pedestrian, and in that worst case, what is the worst programmatic case that you can have? What is the worst programmatic case you would have for pedestrian? What is the worst programmatic you would have with regards to urban design and circulation? And use those as a way to probably evaluate the best outcome of that. That's the only way I can think of trying to make sure we review all of them together in a bundle, because separating it out has its own other issues.
Right.
And in
But so it-
in the meantime, we could use some disclaimer language on the plans, have him put some disclaimer language on the plans,
Like?
indicating that when they say daycare, they could notate that this still under.
No, but this is still under our review. When it finally goes to DOB, we'll have decided whether there's a daycare or not, right? So, but to pick up on this worst-case scenario, I think that makes sense. So, but at the same time, I want to make sure that there's no assumptions, right? So I think that what we could be doing is having them do two things simultaneously. So what they're looking at is the as-of-right scenario without a daycare, without a PCE, but with however much, their 18,000 and whatever ambulatory care, looking for a parking waiver. So it's a use group 11 and use group 4, whatever that is, using the parking assumptions that were given to DOB. And then they're looking for a waiver. Then they do exactly the same analysis using the proposal. So we're going to be reviewing two parallel as proposed, right? Okay? And then when we move to the daycare, which is the hardest one, then we're looking at the parking waiver not granted and the parking waiver granted, right? So there's two scenarios there, and the PCE or another really active commercial use, so both the PCE and some active commercial use in that, as that sort of as-of-right thing. It's a lot, but again, the worst-case scenario for the daycare really is what's proposed, right? The worst combination of uses I could possibly think of to put next to a daycare center. So we could just say the proposed is so terrible that you can't get worse than the proposed, and then just look at that one. And then not go for some other version of the as-of-right with the, and assume no parking waiver. How about like that? So the worst-case scenario for the daycare, no parking waiver, therefore way more cars coming down, and then a PCE and a medical office without a parking waiver. Maybe that's the best way to do it. Does that work?
We'll repeat that when we get to
Yeah.
that calendar number.
Yeah,
Isn't it,
okay.
isn't it with parking waiver is the more critical one? If you,
No.
if you waive the parking, you don't have enough spots on site, then it's a bigger problem. maybe.
Well, the issue for the daycare is there's more cars going in and out. Sorry.
No, and
Carl?
I think just to, what Dr. Sheeta's asking, I would say that the assumption made on the parking reduction is that if they're successful in their exercise, the need or the demand on at least that space that occupies the ambulatory diagnostic should be generating or requiring less parking, thus the waiver would apply.
That's if it were granted, right.
If it were granted, the
If it were
assumption is that,
granted, if they
yeah.
don't there's not as many cars that drive there, right? Because they need to meet the demand criteria, right? So the worst-case scenario is they don't meet the demand, right? That their analysis doesn't prove it. So that's, I think, the worst-case scenario is no parking waiver, PCE, ambulatory care in the building together with the daycare, which again.
We're providing all the required parking.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So then you're looking at the whole crossover and the complexity of that transition of the daycare kids entering the building and the excess amount. If they can meet that threshold, then the reduction in parking should only improve that
Yes.
conflict point. Right?
Yeah.
No, I don't see the
No, it's
the
not gonna do
reduction in
anything.
parking is not going to have any effect on it.
Yeah, I don't think it will.
The demand will be the demand regardless of whether we provide one space or 120 spaces.
Yes.
The demand is
the
based on the
demand.
space that's going to be occupied by
Occupied.
the ambulatory care.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Okay,
Any other, now that we've got the plans?
okay, so
The
so just to
scenarios.
We still need to
clarify.
determine what is the worst case we want for the ambulatory care parking reduction. So
Right.
I think we have ironed out the daycare one.
Right, so the ambulatory care parking reduction, so this one, the parking
Right.
reduction application that we are now speaking about. So we're going to look at essentially two worst-case scenarios, right? As much medical office as they want to have with the required parking, and whatever they have to balance that out with, which is what they did on the DOB-approved plans, with use group 11 and the other use group 4. And then the proposed with all of the expected uses, the desired uses. So two of those will run simultaneously as proposed cases, right? All right, so having looked at that then, all right, we got that?
Yes.
All right, so,
So use group 11, use group 4, retail and ambulatory care without any parking reduction.
yeah, with all the required
All
parking.
required
That's the
parking.
first worst-case scenario, and then the second worst case is ambulatory care without a parking reduction, daycare use, and a PCE, none of which have a parking reduction. Okay? Okay. So, let's see, so I just want to say, I looked up on DOB's website, the ZD1 shows 173 spaces are required as of right, and the as of right drawings are showing 119 spaces. That's the reason that I wanted to see the Department of Buildings approved set of drawings, because how come they need 173 spaces? And they came up with 140, the applicant came up with 145 spaces in the statement of facts. So I think I'm not really sure what they're doing, how they came up with that. So because 173 spaces appear to be the as of right. So again, provide a copy of the DOB-approved drawings, and we need to see that they've been approved with a stamp, or if they still perforate. I don't know if they perforate anymore. Okay. The proposed floor plans show a sub-cellar or cellar level 2, but the sections and charts show only one cellar, so I'm quite confused. The modal split data appears to be based entirely on the Bayside Primary Care Facility study on Francis Lewis Boulevard, while trip generation is from DOT's standards. Since this is a spec ambulatory care facility, it is unknown whether the two facilities will have the same parking demands, so the Bayside one. So the modal split data should also be run using DOT's accepted split data for medical offices and journey to work data based on census tracts. The journey to work chart provided showed 70 to 75% of the residents in the track drive cars. So it seems like the split data is very low compared to car ownership in the census tract. And we'll, of course, want DOT to review the study. Anybody, any other comments on this one?
Threshold for DOT.
Speak louder.
This is under the threshold for DOT review, but are you requesting?
This is a
their
review of the
request
study,
from the
not of
board?
an EAS, but of
Okay,
the study. Right.
Okay,
This is BSA's findings study.
got it.
Now, even though this applies to both the parking reduction for ambulatory care and for the daycare, in terms of the parking analysis, while they showed that the peak demand for daycare is 7, which is just drop off and pick up, there is the staff, daycare staff, and the parking for the daycare staff has not been factored in the analysis, either in the SECRA or no clarification in the text is there, so that needs to be specified and needs to be factored in.
As far as this application is concerned, I don't see reservoir spaces leading up to the drop-off point, and so I'm concerned about backup onto Little Neck Parkway. So they should discuss that, and they should also give details on the operation of the valet versus the self-park, and how they're going to both operate smoothly without any, harm to people who are getting in and out of their cars, regardless of the use there. And there should be more landscaping bordering the self-park area because it's right next to the residential.
I want to add to what Commissioner Oakley Brown said. This is overall, if you just want to look at the overall plan for the parking, not counting the uses. The applicant's parking operation plan states that retailers will park their car and will drop off their car at the valet, and the valet will park the car, and the retailer, those who are going to use the retail uses will walk along a pathway to the parking, to the paved sidewalk. The plans do not show any secured pathway along which those who are dropping off the vehicles or going to pick up the vehicles have a refuge area. Same thing with the reservoir. We need very dedicated reservoir spaces. We need very clearly dedicated refuge area, refuge area.
You mean
for-
pedestrian
Yes, pedestrian
area.
area, for them to wait, to pick up the cars, and also, once they drop off the car, a safe zone along which they can walk to get out of the parking area. And I think that's a very tight space. I'm not sure
I don't
how
see
they're going to address that.
They're not.
So, and I agree with Commissioner Oakley Brown that it may result in backing up
Onto
onto Little Neck, and it's a very busy intersection. And this curb cut is located very close to that intersection of Jericho and Little Neck Parkway, so any backup can cause a significant amount of delay both on Jericho and Little Neck.
Just before going on to the next person, Commissioner Otley Brown, you said, explain the valet versus the self-park and how that will work. You mean at grade level where you drop off your car or you go into the daycare self-park? Is that what you mean?
Or whoever it will be if daycare isn't approved. Yes, I'm
Right.
talking about that self-park area to the right.
Yeah, okay.
Is it that the queuing doesn't occur on the sidewalk in the street?
But it's also the issue of you drive in and then you have to drive out of the self-park.
Right, you're gonna be back, because the way
Yeah.
you look, you gotta back out of your self-park, and I don't even understand how, that's for the next application, yes. But
Right.
as it impacts this application, you are backing out into the approach lane for the valet parking.
Yeah.
So how are you gonna manage that?
Right. Right. Other comments?
I'm looking at these three applications as one, because they actually one building. And I'm wondering, a request for like a major waiver for the parking plus special permit for a PCE plus a school or a daycare in one building, I'm like afraid that this kind of like request is big enough, especially if you look at the community board resistance, the community resistance for this kind of waiver. So I would like to like get like some explanation from all the three applications. I know that we're gonna look at the other two cases in a little bit, but, and I'm also like,
An explanation of what?
explanation of why should we consider all these three major grants for just one building?
I think that
It's
goes
amending
back
too
to
much.
probably why Carlo had to make that decision, because each application may stand on its own. We may, at the end of the day, may think one of them works, but not all three of them. And
They have a right to ask. A
Mhm.
special
They do.
permit is a contemplated use. They have a right to ask. And we have many buildings throughout the city that have several PCEs in one building. They have 3 special permits for
Right.
PCEs because they're huge buildings. So you can't stop an applicant from coming and asking for an option that is available
No, I
to them.
didn't stop them.
I mean, just to clarify, like, one could have come in for the PC on year one, and 2 years
Right.
later, an ambulatory diagnostic,
Right.
and then 5 years later, a school could have come in. It's just, I think what makes it a little trickier is that all three are before us at the same time. but,
And the
yeah.
building is built.
Yeah,
Because that's part of the problem. We might have been able to say, well, we'd entertain your use if you would change the entrance or move the elevator or whatever, but the staircases are in, the elevators are in, we're stuck with the layout, and being stuck with the layout, now that affects how we analyze the appropriateness of these adjacent uses, right?
And
I
the
think
one
that's-
of the three that affects, for example, the envelope is the parking reduction because with or without the parking, but the other two could have come in an
Right.
existing building.
Right.
Easier.
Okay. Other comments?
No.
Mr. Commissioner Sheta? No? I mean,
No, no.
Shabeta? No?
No, I second what was said here. I do understand Commissioner Shetz's point that this seems like it's demanding a lot out of this one property,
Right.
but they have the right to ask.
Right. Yeah, I would say, to put it a little bit differently, they're asking a lot of one building, even if it was as of right.
That's,
You know, because even if they weren't asking for a school, even if they weren't asking for a PCE, they're crowding together these uses that have overlapping and conflicting needs. And had they picked other types of uses with overlapping and conflicting needs, they'd be encountering, on an as-of-right basis, I think, a lot of angry tenants. You know, people who can't figure out how to park, people who can't figure out how to get to the lobby the right way or whatever. So, you know, that's the thing, when you do lease-ups, you have to be careful about how you lay out the interior, what you agree to lease to which tenant on which floor, and so on. And for me, what I'm seeing, having handled lease-ups before, is this is very haphazard leasing, where they're just like, the first guy who comes and was willing to sign, they're like, great, sign here and we'll take care of it, as opposed to a careful understanding of how the shape of the building, the frontage of the building, the limitation on how you get to the parking for the building, et cetera.
And sometimes it's a conditional signature. Like, let's sign and then let's
Yeah.
see if it flies.
Yeah.
And I just want to clarify, I'm not asking them, or I'm not saying that they don't have the right to ask. I'm not saying that. And I'm not asking them either to withdraw the applications. What I'm asking for is explanation for why each of the two applicants, we have two applicants here, not three,
Right.
why each of the two applicants believe that, knowing that the other application is already before us, his request for the waiver he's asking for is legit. I
What do
understand
you mean
that
by
there is
legit?
no hardship,
understand
there is
that.
no hardship
Right.
context here, but at least, what is the need for a PCE? What is the need for a daycare? Because our grants is not just because people ask for them. Our grants are made for a reason, for the community need, and we should look at them
Oh,
from
I
that
know.
perspective.
But a PCE, for one, it's not about a community
Right.
need, really. I mean, there is a finding that says it's be good for the community, but as we know, gyms are a good thing in the community. And we don't look at, when a PCE comes to us, we're looking, really, for one, the original idea of the PCE was to make sure it wasn't being used as a house of prostitution, frankly, right? And now what we're looking at is, are you a nuisance to your neighbors? Because that is an old issue that's kind of no more, so, well, it's coming back, actually. It's a resurrected issue, but we haven't dealt with it ourselves, right? But we're just looking at, is your use problematic to the neighbors, right? So that's a fair question, which we asked of this one that we just discussed earlier. You're a nuisance to the neighbors, either stop being a nuisance or we shut you down, right? So they don't need to be legit, or their question to be legit. There isn't any legitimacy question. The question is this the right use in a building that has medical offices, which is actually a kind of a common combination, medical offices and PCEs, you know, like physical therapy centers and things like that? Or is this the correct use to be adjacent to a daycare center where everybody's sharing the same front door? That's another kind of a question, right? But at least they're allowed to come and ask for it, and we are allowed to say, we have a problem with this, and how are you going to be dealing with that conflict, right? So I would just say, I'm personally just observing haphazard leasing effects, and it's not something that they need to legitimize. It's just, it seems to me that they're not carefully considering their tenancy, their simultaneous tenancies, that's all, which is really more about business.
You know, in terms of the placement of these uses, each one of these applications, for each one of these cases that's before us, all of them have different entrances, so, and not concentrated from the same location.
But we shouldn't talk about the entrances yet, because we're just still talking about the garage.
And I do,
Right.
the reason I'm raising it, because the medical office entrance is from the Jericho Turnpike, though the parking garage drop-off is behind the building.
Right.
So we do need to understand how
Yes.
how people are moving within the building, where are they looking, where are they waiting, where are they going to be dropped off, because that also does affect in terms of the reduction
In the parking. Okay, so, yeah, so this is the problem. So I put those kinds of notes in the daycare because I was so concerned about the effect on the children, right? But it is fair that issues about the medical, where I don't believe for 1 second that people are going to walk all the way around the block to enter the medical office. And because there are 2 back doors to get you right to the medical office, and they happen to be right next to the daycare center.
And that's supposed to be an exclusive daycare center exitway or corridor, I'm not very sure.
Right.
So,
So that's part of it. So, that, you know, in the commentary, though, when we look at a reduction in parking, we're not normally looking at the layout of the use that's being, where the parking is being reduced. We're looking at the demand, right? Are you giving enough parking spaces, right? So, but when we look at a daycare or a school, we always look at the adjacencies of uses. So I think maybe that's more when we should be talking about it.
There is a separate entrance, though, just
for the medical.
for the medical from the daycare on the parking side.
Right. Yes, you're right.
So, yes, so I agree that the question, if any, would come up in the daycare
Okay,
issue,
yeah,
but not
yeah,
the
yeah.
medical, because there is entrance into the medical offices from where the drop-off is for your cars for medical.
Okay.
Right, right.
And with that, can we move?
Yes, we need to move, but we need to I just want to, yeah, okay, I'll make a note at the beginning. Okay, never mind.
Okay, go ahead.
So item number 2 is 2018-137BZ, 25177 Jericho Turnpike. This is a special permit application to permit the operation of a daycare, Children of America.
Okay, so we do have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. In this case, Community Board recommends denial with 2 in favor of the proposed 73-19 special permit. No explanation further than that was given. And again, Councilmember Grodenchik sent a letter of opposition citing traffic and parking concerns and believing that these will be exacerbated by the proposed school use. Again, we have 2 letters in support and 6 letters in opposition. These are all letters related to all 3 applications. And again, there's partial stop work on the project for plumbing. And then I just want to preface this because when all of us go back and listen to the video, we should note that a lot of comments about this application were made in the prior hearing, which was item number 1, 2018-136BZ. So you need to listen to both videos in order to get a full sense of the application. So one thing that we said is in the worst-case scenario uses that we're looking at the daycare center, an ambulatory care facility without a parking waiver, and a PCE as one version of the worst-case scenario, and then the other one of the daycare center, the PCE, and ambulatory care with a parking waiver, okay? So both of those need to be studied in all of their forms, both in the EAS and in the, unless it's determined that the EAS has already looked at a worst-case scenario, but in terms of demand studies and so on, that should be the mix, okay? So, as a threshold matter for this 7319 special permit application, There is a permit from New York City Department of Health for another location, but that tells us nothing about this location. If the proposal is to qualify as a type C school under the zoning resolution, then we need information on how it would qualify as a, quote, childcare program under Article 47.03 of the New York City Health Code. They need to clarify how also this program qualifies as childcare under Section 47.03 if students are school age 5 to 12 years. I actually didn't understand how that actually works. I appreciate that you want a place where you're dropping off kids from school, but I didn't know how that fits in with the definition of childcare under that health code section, which is the requirement in our case, since it's not operating as a school, right, as a school like we think of as a private school,
But it says
full-time.
it has infant ages.
No,
infant to
infants
12.
also.
Right.
Right, but so the infant part I get, it's the 5 to 12 part, which I didn't
Because they
read.
should be in school while they're in a
Right.
daycare.
Well, this
Yeah.
is
Well,
an
they said-
aftercare
yeah,
for
they-
the
This is
kids who are
aftercare.
5
Right.
to 12.
This is aftercare, but the issue is, under the rules of our special permit, it needs to be a 47.03 New York City Health Code daycare, childcare program, right? So if the older kids aren't in what's known as a childcare program, what are they in, right? I just don't know. I didn't spend a lot of time reviewing that section of the health
That's fair.
code, but they need to qualify, right, in order to be that.
So it can't be like they're the accessory use to the primary daycare use, because in the afternoon, they may have extra space.
I don't know, they may
Well, they have to
qualify
make
under
it-
the health code.
Oh, okay.
So they just need to show us, because they made no effort at all to establish themselves as a 47.03 City Health Code school, right, or childcare program, which is what's required under the zoning. And we know that they're not a school that gives full-day instruction, right? With regarding the search for sites where the use would be permitted as of right, I don't actually see signs of one having been done. There's an Excel spreadsheet that looks at probable locations, but it doesn't indicate any outreach to landlords or sellers. It just,
Whether they were available.
it
or-
just says, this looks like it's a private house, this one, wouldn't be good because it's a parking garage or something. It's not like they went and talked to potential sellers, so I don't know that that shows that any research was
The
done.
chart was confusing. I mean, it showed there are 36 potential sites, and all seem to meet their minimum requirement of space of 10,000 square feet, but no narrative was provided justifying why those were not considered, and again.
Right, it was
It needs to
just
be
a
flushed.
blanket statement, they weren't available to lease or buy. And what we
Yeah.
look for is an actual examination, site by site, as to why the site was not appropriate.
Right. So, and in case the applicant is not familiar with that standard, we have lots of these where you could just give them an example, where we see a real estate agents, usually it's 2 or 3, go check the neighborhoods, say we negotiated with this one and the asking was impossible, or they weren't willing to give us the amount of space we needed, or that kind of thing.
These are all the available sites in this radius, and this is the only thing, like, there's nothing like that. There's the only
Right.
available sites. We've done a thorough research of all available sites. These are the ones that were indicated, and these are why these don't work. That wasn't.
Right, well, they provided a funny little chart, but the chart was more like they looked at a tax map and they said, oh, here's lots in this target area, and then they looked at a land use map and said, oh, this one won't work because there's a house on it, and this one won't work because of whatever reason, and they all were looked at as new construction. This is a tenant. You don't need new construction. So, so that was the other thing. Plus, this doesn't have good outdoor space, so if anything, they would have been looking for something that had outdoor space instead of rooftop use, right? With respect to traffic safety, which is a big part of our discussion in the prior discussion, so therefore the segue to that earlier video. There's a lot going on in this building, and all of it is dependent on access from and egress onto Little Neck Parkway if you drive a car. All valet parking and retail parking access crosses the route over which parents with tiny children and baby carriages and the disabled must pass. Retail parking isn't valet, or it makes no sense if it is, because it's right up against the building. Why would you give it to a valet parker if you just pull it up? Yeah, exactly. So, and seller parking is valet, so that's a confusing situation. Daycare parking isn't valet, and drivers pass in front of the valet stop spot to get out of the driveway. All of the parking overlaps, and the onus is on the poor valet parkers to somehow keep everything safe. I don't know that they're paid enough for this.
Sure.
There is also no sidewalk to separate pedestrians from parkers, which was what was said earlier. And what about all of the baby carriages that we know pile up in front of the door when people walk or take public transit to the site? The order of things appears to be completely backwards, and there are too many functions happening in one place. And then I'm not sure that the parking analysis and parking planners and the environmental consultants got the subtleties of all the different arrivals and departures of the daycare. Initial arrivals, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Departures of UPA kids who don't want to pay for the next part of the program, 11 a.m. Arrival of school-age kids, 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. Departures of kids in general, 4 to 6:30 p.m. This is a busy site, just with the kids. And what about bus or van drop-offs? No mention of any of that in case the program does. Often daycare programs with so many kids have bus pickups. And what are the bollards for? There's some bollards, and where is the plan that shows them? They mentioned that DOT gave them permission to install some bollards. Where? What for? Right? It's just general, it's not on drawings. The first floor plan indicates also that the door next to the daycare entry is only for emergency egress from the building. But that makes no sense in the context of valet parking. You leave your car with the valet and walk in the nearest door, not the one that is all the way around the block. I mean, you walk one block and then half a block to get to the front door, especially for a medical office. You feel bad, you're disabled, you're whatever, you are not walking all the way around the block, and there's no way that the medical tenant is going to put up with that. No way. The corridor labeled daycare emergency exit corridor conveniently leads from the ramp, that's the parking ramp, which is a weird place to have an entrance in the first place because it's starting to descend, right, to the medical office elevators, although you have to go down a few steps in order to reach it. So not ideal, don't know why you should go down steps in a brand-new building. But, so it's just inviting that also to be a medical access because it takes you right to the elevators. And by the way, you know how this works. The landlord says, okay, that's really egress, and then somebody breaks the door, puts a block in front of it so that there's free passage, and then it becomes the main way to get in. Then at the third floor daycare, at the third floor, daycare and medical office share a floor. And there is no dedicated egress stair. This all makes me very uncomfortable on so many levels. Adults potentially interacting with children, people who are ill exposing children to their illnesses and vice versa. As we know, it could go the other way. This is not a good mix of intermingled uses. What could possibly be the reason for spreading the uses throughout the building like this other than the happenstance of lease-ups? That's why I mentioned this. And if we just look at the initial arrival, you have older kids and presumably parents arriving all day long, passing in front of the tiniest children. That's how you get into the daycare. There is no central lobby into which all of the different age groups, staff, and visitors arrive and then disperse. The only way to get to the elevator or the stairwell is past the infants and toddlers. Even the person at the security desk has to walk through the infant room to get to his desk, his or her desk. And the strollers are proposed to be located in the elevator lobby. Where will they fit? That is a hazard, and they will end up blocking egress both from the elevator and the stair. In addition, you can't have the only 2 stairwells in the building be exclusively devoted to the daycare, which is what it says in the statement of facts. The medical facility also needs use of a convenience stair, especially when it occurs on split levels and there is only 1 elevator. If I'm a doctor who's taken some more rooms on the other level, I don't want to have to wait for the elevator to run up and down. I want to take this convenience stair. That goes for staff too. They're running and checking, they go to a lab, wherever. And there's also only 1 elevator. What if it's broken? They have to be able to use the stair as a convenience stair. So I think right there you have a problem because both the medical facility and the daycare need to use stair A since they have no access at grade or at the 2nd floor to stair B. So you've got medical and daycare sharing by per force that stair A. So this is also a proposal to put, there's also a proposal to put daycare on the 3rd floor with play area on the roof. And I remember from reading the daycare rules, you need fire department and DOB approval to having small children so high in a building because it takes them a long time to go down a fire stair. So we would need fire department to review the entire application and to look also at the fact that there is play for the daycare on the roof. This floor plan needs to be submitted also to Department of Health, and I think it's called the Division of Child Care Services. We used to do that for a review, but I have to say that I'm opposed to the chaotic intermingling of uses like this, and I don't see that the arrival situation has been figured out at all. And then there is the drop-off access, and this is what we talked about at the earlier hearing, to the medical offices and the PCE from Jericho Turnpike, even though we are told in the statement of facts that 95 feet of that frontage is devoted to bus stops. Why is the assumption that the 38% modal split for taxi drop-off for the medical facility, and I didn't get the number of the modal split taxi drop-off for the daycare, can be handled on busy Jericho Turnpike? A traffic study showing impact on levels of service needs to be conducted as well and isn't. Maybe they didn't somehow or other cross a threshold, but they need to do a level of service analysis.
Yeah, that's usually a secret threshold. I think after level 1 assessment, you go to level 2 and they think it's level.
Right, but they didn't do a level of service.
But there wasn't a secret review for.
Right, so we
your
need one
request.
from our point of view. And then, just in terms of the seeker review, DEP comment letter of March 22nd for air quality and noise, and for April 12th for hazmat. It says a Phase 2 work plan and a HASP is required, but is DEP aware that this building is built?
They are, they actually called us and asked about it, basically, the applicant needed to revise their EAS, which they submitted, because they originally had in-ground disturbance related to this action. However, that's not correct, because the in-ground disturbance is related to the as-of-right building structure. So they're actually they revised their EAS, and we resent it to DEP, and they told us that they would modify this letter for hazmat, and that the scope of the testing that they would have to do would be greatly reduced.
Has to be reduced.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry,
Has to
I'm
be reduced.
confused, I'm confused.
Oh.
So, the in-ground disturbance is with regards to an as-of-right use, which does not have a
Building.
as-of-right building, but that does not have a
Have a daycare.
daycare facility. Whereas a daycare facility, you're exposing children, and this was one of my comments, to hazmat issues. We don't know whether vapor barrier has been provided. We don't know what the air sampling was. This was a prior automotive-related gas station.
So there
right?
was a
So-
limited phase 2 that was done for.
But it wasn't approved by DEP, that phase 2.
So I'm not comfortable with such an use being even considered until we have a sign off on the environmental part of it also, in addition to all these other concerns that are being raised. So we do, I just want to be clear that DEP realizes it's not just the as of right in-ground distribution, it's also
They
that
know
there's a
that there are
proposed
3 actions before BSA. They know that there's a daycare, a medical office, and a PCE. and
So
they're not
shouldn't
reviewing
the
PCE.
phase-
But their, the way seeker is done is an increment between an as of right and a proposed.
Understood, and the as of right does not allow a daycare, whereas a proposed, that
But
a
the
daycare is.
structure and the in-ground disturbance they look at, so they're saying the as of right structure, the building could be there, and that is not before BSA.
So the question then is, if DEP were to allow a use such as daycare facility, which is not permitted as of right there, in an as of right building, what kind of environmental securities they would want to ensure that such an use would be permitted? That's the answer I would want from
Right.
DEP.
But just to be clear, you're talking about hazmat review versus air quality review. Right, like in the
Well,
hazmat.
ultimately, yes, that's,
I think to me hazmat is an issue also.
No, understood, but I'm just saying, just because they're saying that the building could have been built as of right and their increment is therefore smaller for hazmat, doesn't mean the increment is smaller for air quality if the use is a use.
No, my
that
question
would
is
be-
with hazmat. So
Okay.
so you have an as of right building
Yeah.
where such an use is not permitted. So the incremental cleanup for just a commercial use is, let's say, X. But if this were to be a school building, the incremental cleanup from that X to a school is different. And that should have been, even if it's a conversion of an as of right building,
I see.
that improvement would have to be addressed in some manner. What those measures would have to be for this facility to have a proposed use that is not permitted as of right.
so we have seen schools go into manufacturing buildings, right? But in those cases, those are gut renovations, right? And DEP has sometimes said, you need to dig up your concrete slab or pour, and install a vapor barrier and a sub-slab depressurization system and pour a new slab, and then have this kind of a monitoring thing on the outside, and that maybe in 10 years you'll be able to take it away because finally the toxins are no longer breathable. Here, you have nothing. Here, it was built however that worked in terms of minimum standards for cleanup on an as-of-right project. I actually don't even know what happens there. And so certainly no sub-slab depressurization system was installed unless it was required by DEC or something, because I don't know if they removed tanks that had spills. We don't actually know any of the
So
history.
they will require some kind of soil vapor sampling
How?
anyway.
How are they gonna sample the soil?
They told us that they would.
It's 98% built. With the parking ready to go. It's ready to go. The only thing they're waiting for is who should they move into it?
So they did like backward environmental investigation after they built the building? They could sample the soil, although the building is in place. They could go pour the slab and get.
So there was a limited phase two
They
done.
didn't do it yet.
Right.
They're gonna request. They're requesting it now.
No, but they can't do any sampling, other than making a core drilling right through the new slab.
I think we just
They
need a
could put a
They
rig
told us
and they sample
that's what they're
exactly
going to
like the building is not there. They could do the same thing. It's doable.
It's doable.
And
They
then,
told us that's what they'll modify. the
But I
certificate
agree
after
with
July.
Vice Chair regarding the
Yeah.
cleanup. When your intention is to build a commercial building, what they call it, the objective cleanups or the cleanup objectives are totally different from when you put, for example, a residential building or a school. So we should make sure that.
the threshold is much higher for daycare, so how is that being addressed?
I don't think they look at it like that.
No, but so that's the thing, but we're looking
But
at it
that's how
like that.
we're look- right.
And we have seen existing buildings converted to schools where they impose, because of the history of use, they impose some significant
Right.
environmental measures.
Even in existing buildings, they had to provide vapor barriers and SVOCs and other things, so. If they don't need it, great, but we need that document and for DEP
Right.
to say that the site is clean, nothing is
So
needed.
I'm not
Great,
sure
that's
if
the
they
best case.
mentioned that they are doing environmental investigation now, why they would do that?
They're doing
Supposedly-
it because DEP is telling them to.
Yeah, because the threshold for a commercial building was so little that it didn't trigger anything.
Yeah, but you should look at the reference data done before the development, before the construction.
They did, so
They did.
DEP looked at their Phase 2 and commented that their Phase 2 was limited Phase 2, and it wasn't done under DEP direction, right? And
Yes.
so we don't really like your Phase 2, but we want you to do a Phase 1.
But they based this, also this request on the fact that they thought there would be more soil disturbance, which is not correct.
Well, the
They're not-
soil was already disturbed.
Yeah, that's,
Which is
and to
permitted
them,
as of right.
because it's as of right,
Right.
there's zero in relation to the BSA action, like zero addition.
Yes, understood.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so now we're going back in circles
Yeah.
because the disturbance would bring up toxins, et
Yeah.
cetera. Okay.
Possibly they are considering what is existing today as like the benchmark, and they want to see if they need to move beyond that, or is it acceptable for the intended use? Probably this is the case, that's why.
Okay, and then the other thing is in terms of noise, we don't, the building's built. Do we know that the window wall assemblies provide the level of attenuation that was required in the analysis? Don't know. The site fronts Jericho Turnpike after all, it's not exactly a quiet corner. So we need more information on that. Anybody, so away from the environmental, we still didn't talk about the basics of the school.
I think my concern have been raised by both you and Commissioner Otley Brown with regards to the circulation from the parking level all the way to the daycare. The separation of the uses is not at all clear, especially the staircase movements and how that is going to be secured, that has not been clearly stated. And going back to the question that daycare staff will be parking, where will they be parking? And that needs to be indicated in the plan and in the statement. I think those were my comments, and that hazmat was the other one. And that walkout from the public area, all of that.
What do you mean, the walkout from the stadium?
Area of refuge.
Oh, the-
The area, safety area for
Safety,
pedestrian,
yeah,
for
but
waiting for pickup of vehicles. And that would be also for the daycare facility, when you're trying to cross that area, what if some vehicle is coming? And you want to be able to wait. There has to be some minimum safety area for pedestrian to wait. And that goes to the next one, is what kind of noise attenuation is being provided by the PCA to maintain this noise separation between the
Yes.
daycare facility? So I'll raise that in the
Yeah, yeah,
PCA
okay.
one, but I just wanted to tie the two together.
So in addition to the question about the operation of the parking, self-park versus valet, they should talk about, clarify their self-park maneuverings, because they talk about taking a counterclockwise loop around the parking area once you come out of the parking spot. And I don't see that there's ability for you to do that. They also should talk about how the young people who go to regular school will be coming to this site afterwards, and they don't address it at all, whether they're being brought there by bus or whether they're walking there on their own. And if they are, how do they get to the entrance through the parking lot without a sidewalk? So those are my basic issues. I agree with you about the site selection and that they have to go into detail about a few serious availability sites, and they don't.
Okay, others?
You're gonna,
I just want to, I agree with everything that was said, but I just want to add, there needs to be some sort of argument how this is appropriate for, in so many aspects for the children here, both in the security aspect of it, both in the joint uses on the third floor, also seconding what Commissioner Champa said with the PCE being above and below it. I don't see how this is appropriate, and they really didn't provide anything that made me feel that there's going to be security or separation of uses or that the best nurturing environments even being considered for these children, like when seconding what you stated, what the chair stated, as to the entering into the daycare facility, you're going by the youngest children. It all seems like a very poor layout and very poor use of if this was to be a use in this building, it seems like it was improperly thought of to be where it is.
Mr. Chita? You want to add anything?
no further comments now.
Yeah. Yeah, very plagued application. Okay.
Item number 3, 2018-145BZ. This is also 25173 Jericho Turnpike. This is a special permit to permit a physical culture establishment planned and finished to be located on portions of the first and second floors.
Okay, so I'm going to read again, that we approve of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends denial with 3 in favor of the proposed PCE special permit. No explanation was given for these. Councilmember Rodenchick also sent a letter of opposition citing traffic and parking concerns that he believes will be exacerbated by the proposed PCE use. We have 2 letters in support and 6 letters in opposition citing concerns about traffic and parking. Okay. Note that in this application, and I want to just note that the board has been discussing 2 prior applications. Number 1, sorry, let me just say.
2018-136BZ.
Yeah, 2018-136BC, and number 2, 2018-137BZ. So in listening to this video, you should listen to those videos because the comments in those are relevant to this application. So notably, though, this application is filed by a different applicant than those other 2. This is the applicant who represents the PCE, and they seem not to have been aware in their drawings that there's 2 other applications before us because the drawings aren't coordinated at all. So it doesn't show the proposed, the proposed parking plan. It's not coordinated with the daycare and medical office drawings. So the parking plan and circulation is completely different from what is proposed in the other 2 applications. It's showing quadruple stackers parked in front of the entrance to the daycare center. And for me, I have to say that underscores the inappropriateness of the parking maneuverability that we saw in the prior applications, because if they at some point realized that they were short on parking, they could easily put in these quadruple stackers, which would completely undermine how the retail parks in the building, how the daycare is accessed, safety of the pedestrians, because the stackers are right where the sidewalk would be. So anyway, so that was, to me, just a hint on the level of chaos we're talking about at this entrance. But in terms of the PCE itself, because it's adjacent to the daycare and medical offices, we need some serious information on acoustical separation. Yeah.
I just want to make a note. I'm not totally confident that they was not aware of the other 2 applications because they requested the same day today to be on concurrently.
Well, they should have coordinated the materials because it's giving information about, gives me information that I wouldn't have had otherwise about stackers, right? We also, I didn't find in the file DOI or fire department? We have it? I didn't find it in the folder.
I think had this application been just for a special permit for a parking, I don't think I would have.
Special permit for a PCE.
Sorry, too many actions.
We're number 3.
Special permit for only PCE, I think some of my questions would have been different, but because of the nature of the uses and regardless of what other uses go there, I think some of these comments are still valid. First of all, as the chair pointed out, this application does not have all the corresponding information as stated in the previous two. It's not just the layout. In the statement of facts and findings, there are a lot of incorrect information with regards to the number of parking spaces, square footage. All of those informations need to be updated and be consistent. The sound attenuation is one of the questions I have, and that's, I think.
Okay. Anybody else? I mean, this goes again to.
I do have one important zoning question. That is, as part of the zoning chart, it says 58 parking spaces are required and it complies. However, using the 1 per 300 space, it's not 58, 59 spaces. So it's just one additional parking space.
Okay.
So they need to revise that and correct the chart.
Great. So you're saying it should be 59
It
spaces?
should be 59 required spaces, not 58.
Based on the square footage they
Based on
provided.
the square footage, yeah.
They should state that they're going to provide massage licenses, because there are massage rooms here. Okay.
They can confirm.
That's it? Move on?
Yeah. Anybody else on this one? No?
Item number 4, 2018-180BZ, 1441G, South Avenue, Staten Island. This is a special permit to permit rooftop parking on a public parking garage.
Right, okay. We have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board waives its hearing stating they were not aware of community opposition. This building is not adjacent to any residential uses, but it is adjacent to what's called a preserved woodland area. So I would like to understand from whatever agency manages this area, whether lighting on the roof will disturb wildlife. That is actually a very big issue with wildlife. And if that is an issue, then the roof lighting needs to be something that dims down as it twilights and until it's dark, right? Therefore, it would mean limiting the use of the roof at night. This parking garage is directly across, this is something I just need to raise. This parking garage is directly across Teleport Drive from the school we recently approved in February. During those hearings, and this is the same applicant, so why it's relevant. During those hearings, the board expressed concern about the interaction of students with traffic patterns. Here, the proposed entrance and egress to the garage is directly across the drive from the entrance to the school. So 415 cars or more than 830 trips per day potentially passing the school bus drop-offs, MTA bus drop-offs, and children pedestrians arriving from those drop-off points, plus from their parents' guardians' cars, and also children on their way to the playing fields across Teleport Drive. These issues should have been addressed during the hearings for the school, and I don't know, but we'll check whether the school applicant made us aware of the garage as a potential issue. That's the applicant. I know in the EAS, the EAS discusses the existence of the garage, doesn't mention rooftop parking, which is not what I'm concerned about, but does not mention anything about the entrance to the garage being directly across from the school. It doesn't know that, right? And I do not believe that the applicants in the school application even made a mention of the presence of this garage and the fact that the entrance is directly across the street from the school. And it's a narrow street, so when I say street, we're just talking about a driveway. It's not like a 60-foot wide street, right? So the the only way that I can think of addressing this, because I have to say I'm rather angry about this, the drive entrance egress to and from the garage needs to be flipped to come directly from teleport rather than from the school drive. And that way, all of the car traffic would come from a place where there are no students, or there may be students crossing to get to the playing fields, but it's not directly in their path of walking. And you could have, if you want to have an entrance to come into the corporate park, then just have an exit, a pedestrian exit to the opposite school, to the school, which makes it convenient for everyone because they're walking directly into that building, but they're not driving there. The tech memo 2 describes parking demand for the entire site at 460 spaces, with 564 spaces required by zoning and 935 spaces being provided on the zoning lot. So the proposed rooftop parking is only 135 spaces, so I'm just trying to understand the perceived need for those extra 135 spaces where the provided far exceeds, almost doubles demand, or actually more than doubles demand. And also, this is another thing that the EAS could not have been aware of, would rooftop parking affect air quality for the school use? That was another thing that would have been considered, and that's not in the EAS tech memo, the fact of roof parking.
So the tech memo was done because of the Euler action,
Right.
not the BSA actions, so.
No, but the tech memo was done for the ULURP action, but so as not to be accused of segmentation, they make sure that they state that we're also going to the BSA for the following approvals, school, right? I don't think it mentions that they're coming to the BSA for rooftop parking, so that's another thing that should have been in the EAS. And certainly then, DEP could have looked at air quality for the school in terms of cars in an open parking lot. I don't know whether they do that, but I'm assuming that does add to potential, with a stationary source. Okay. Anybody else on this one?
Okay. Item number 5, 2017-261BZ, 527 East New York Avenue, Brooklyn. This item is being postponed for failure to properly notify.
Right.
Just one note, going back to my appeals new case, it will be postponed, the applicant's 2018-125A, it will have to be postponed, 495 Wild Avenue. They did not do proper notice.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry.
This concludes the public hearing?
This concludes the public hearing.
What are you doing?
The public review session for May 6, 2019.
Okay, thank you.